Chapter 387. By shouting out Su Li's whereabouts, he had forced all the people and matters hidden in the darkness into the light of day. Chen Chongqing had not done this deliberately, but had acted according to his heart. What he cared about the most was following his heart. But before doing this, he had naturally carefully considered the consequences and felt that the benefits would outweigh the disadvantages. Just as Liang Wang's son had sighed ruefully. This was a sort of strategy and also a sort of calculation. On his journey south, the principles that Su Li had taught him, like strategies and sword styles, had all been used by him. From another perspective, when he shouted those 4 words to the bright and beautiful spring sunshine of Xuanyang City, it was like stabbing an intellectual sword into the pitch-black night, finally tearing open a hole and finding some light. But the moment he saw Liang Wang's son with his own eyes, he suddenly realized that there was a problem with his calculations. The problem here was not that he could not defeat and had to flee, but that he believed that Liang Wang's son should not have appeared in the first place. Liang Wang's son had disregarded the inheritance of the Wang estate and the surging will of the people. He had actually come to kill Su Li in broad daylight. Just why? Why? Chen Chongqing asked Su Li. Su Li replied, because they are all surnamed Liang. Liang Xiaoxiao, Liang Hongzhuang, Liang Hongsun, these 3 people who had shown that they most wanted Su Li dead were all surnamed Liang. They were all of Prince Liang's bloodline. And what unresolvable grudge did Su Li and the Liang household have, once an emperor, who would be willing to remain a prince forever? Su Li looked out the window at the faintly discernible black lotus carriage and said, what the successive masters of the Liang household wanted to do the most was to return to the capital and sit on the imperial throne once more. It was just that they never had the chance. Only 10-odd years ago, with that internal strife in the capital, did they finally see a possibility. Chen Chongqing had heard Su Li speak of that matter and asked in confusion, back then, wasn't the longevity sect the one that wanted to rise up? Su Li replied, to scheme for the world, one must think deeply. Several hundred years ago, the Liang household began to infiltrate the longevity sect. 10-odd years ago, the longevity sect incited conflict between the north and the south. It was precisely their good method. Chen Chongqing was confused. Back then, the elders of the longevity sect had all been killed by Su Li's sword, and the scheme that the Liang household had hidden for several hundred years had been crushed. They truly did hate them. But why did they hate Su Li to the bone? Su Li said, one of those elders has the surname Liang, so he should be Liang Xiaoxiao's ancestor. As for why Liang Wang's son and Liang Hongzhuang hate me so much, perhaps it's because after I killed people in the longevity sect, I took a trip to Xuanyang City and killed all those old fellows in the Liang household. Chen Chongqing was silent and speechless. He thought to himself, this is the same as killing an entire family. With such a deep hatred, it's no wonder that the youths of King Liang's bloodline hate Su Li so much that Liang Xiaoxiao didn't even hesitate to collude with the demons. Outside the window, Liang Wang's son and the bishop of Xuanyang City could faintly be heard conversing. Chen Chongqing listened silently for a while and suddenly asked, Senior, do we really need to kill so many people? A mocking expression appeared on Su Li's face. Are you preparing to preach again? Chen Chongqing shook his head and said, I just feel that this matter shouldn't have caused so much bloodshed. Su Li did not directly answer. He said, back then the longevity sect and the Liang household wanted to conquer the south and the north. At that time, the capital was in utter chaos, and the imperial court and the orthodoxy were still divided and in confrontation. The only problem that the Southerners could not resolve was also the greatest problem, the existence of Tianhai. In the end, they found a method to resolve this problem. What method? They wanted me to go to the capital and kill Tianhai. Even if I couldn't kill Tianhai, I believed that Tianhai would still be heavily injured. Senior, did you go? The moment Chen Chongqing asked this question, he knew that it was nonsense. Of course, Su Li did not go to the capital to kill the Tianhai Divine Empress. or else history would not have turned out this way. Just as expected. Suli looked at him like he was an idiot and said, "Do I look like I'm sick?" Chun Chongqing thought to himself, those Southerners really are sick to actually think of such an impossible idea. He asked, "How did they persuade Senior back then?" "They captured my wife and imprisoned her in the cold pool of the longevity sect. Then, they used the righteous cause to persuade me." When Suli said these words, there was no other expression on his face. But even after 10-odd years, Chun Chongqing seemed to still be able to sense his anger. "No one likes to kill people, and I don't like it either." Suli finally said, "If too much blood flows, it's very troublesome to clean the sword, let alone the clothes, so I don't like to bleed either. But sometimes people must be killed and blood must flow." Chun Chongqing understood. This story of the past that he had once heard had been completely filled in today. Suli wanted to use this matter to tell him a simple principle, and at the same time, he did not want to listen to his advice. To exist in the world, to live freely, to protect the people one loved from harm, one had to be strong enough and make the entire world acknowledge one's strength, fear one's strength. How could one prove it? How could one make the world acknowledge this point? One had to dare to kill, to dare to make the entire world bleed. Suli had done just this. He killed all of the longevity sect's elders, almost wiped out King Liang's household, and turned the continent into a river of blood. Even though he wasn't able to save his wife's life, no one dared to threaten him or use him in the next dozen or so years. No one dared to threaten his daughter either. Understanding did not mean that he could accept it, but Chun Chongqing could not say anything more to Suli, so he could only say it to someone else. He walked to the window, opened it, and gazed at Liang Wangsun in the black Lotus Imperial carriage. He simply said, "I want to protect him." Liang Wangsun's handsome and noble face revealed a mysterious smile. "Many people believe that you died in the Garden of Zhou, but I didn't think that you would die in Xuanyang City." Chun Chongqing's words were very simple, and Liang Wangsun's response was also very simple. Since he had killed Suli under the watchful eyes of countless people, it meant that he no longer cared about the threats of anyone, not even the orthodoxy. Back then, he did not kill you, he did not kill Liang Hongzhuang, and he also did not kill Yang Xiao. Chun Chongqing continued. He left the Liang household a path of retreat, so perhaps the Liang household can also leave him a path of retreat. But back then, very few people were able to survive, and do you really think that was a path of retreat? No, what the Liang household lost was the hope of countless people over the past several hundred years. However, I really can leave him a path of retreat. Liang Wangsun callously said, "You let me chop off his 4 limbs, cripple his meridians, and I'll let him live." Chun Chongqing fell silent for a while, then said, "That's not fair." Liang Wangsun replied, "Blood for blood, death for death, nothing is more fair than that." Chun Chongqing said, "Senior went to the snowy plains for the sake of the humans and was heavily injured by the demon's encirclement. Otherwise, none of you would have been able to kill him. So he should not have died at the hands of humans, at least not this time. At the very least, he should not have died like this, no matter how many people he once killed, even if he really wasn't a good person." Hearing these words, the priests around the inn and the death sworn of the Liang household all felt their moods change. Liang Wangsun looked at Chun Chongqing at the window and calmly said, "Perhaps what you say is reasonable, for a legend of a generation to die like this. I, who killed him, will probably only leave behind the name of a thief in the annals of history, but I don't care and the world won't care, because this is the only chance to kill him, and everyone in the world wants him dead." Chun Chongqing asked, "Even if this is tantamount to conspiring with the demons? This is a shameless murder, let alone conspiring with the demons. Even if it's a deal with the devil, so what?" As Liang Wangsun finished speaking, the buildings around the inn began to collapse one after another, the figures of countless cultivators appearing. Although the city gate of Xuanyang City was already closed, How could it stop these people that wanted to kill Su Li? A fiery ray of light suddenly flashed in the sky. As the temperature rose and a fierce gale blew, a red cloud Qilin landed on one end of the street. Shui, he sat on it, his armor still stained with the blood from that day. Soon after, Liang Hongzhuang, dressed in dancing clothes, appeared on the other end of the street. His charming face was already covered in dust, and the sword wounds on his body were still clearly visible. It was a mystery how he had managed to endure and rush back. Seeing Liang Hongzhuang appear, Hua Jifu slightly creased his brow. On that day, it was precisely this bishop of Xuanyang City that had secretly informed Liang Hongzhuang of Su Li's whereabouts. You see, even the orthodoxy actually wants him dead. Liang Wangsun looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "And how can you oppose the entire human world?" Chen Chongqing looked at those figures around the inn and in the alleys. He did not know who these people were, what sort of reputation they had in the northern lands of the continent, or what sect they belonged to. He could only sense how terrifying these people were from their qi. These were all people that had come to kill Su Li. Shui, he was a divine general of the Great Zhou, so he probably would not act. Liang Hongzhuang probably already did not have the strength to act. But these people would act. Not to mention that there was still that famous assassin, Lu Qing, who had always been hiding in the shadows. In today's battle, besides Liang Wangsun, the most terrifying person was probably this person. Su Li was heavily injured. He had sent an invitation to the entire continent for a banquet. The guests that had come to participate in this banquet had already arrived. They used their swords as chopsticks, prepared to drink a cup of fine wine made from blood and enjoy a feast of human flesh. Chen Chongqing did not know if there would still be guests coming to this banquet, so he wanted to try flipping over the table. He stood by the window, looking at Liang Wangsun in the black lotus carriage. His expression did not change. He slowly circulated his true qi, and his spiritual sense fell into the sheath of his sword. He connected with the spiritual soul of the black dragon and awakened those swords that had slumbered for many days. Countless swords. He began to calculate, began to prepare to ignite his true essence, began to prepare for the simultaneous attack of 10,000 swords. The intellectual sword, the blazing sword, these were the swords that Su Li had taught him. The 10,000 swords were his swords. He wanted to try and see if he could use his advancement in the path of the sword to make up for the consumption of the 10,000 swords' sword intent, thus recreating that scene in front of the mausoleum of Zhou and then directly killing Liang Wangsun in one blow. Chen Chongqing was a young genius at the upper level of ethereal opening, while Liang Wangsun was a true expert on the proclamation of liberation. No matter how one looked at it, even Chen Chongqing himself, the difference in strength between them was like a city. But he still wanted to try and see if he could kill his opponent, because the current situation was predetermined. He had to kill Liang Wangsun so that Su Li could live. Perhaps this was the newest principle that he had learned from Su Li. Finally, over 3,000. This plot would begin to speed up tomorrow. The reason why it had been written slowly these past 2 days was firstly because he was lacking a breath, and secondly, it truly needed to be slowed down so that Chen Chongqing could walk a little more solidly. For this principle of killing, everyone can go back and look at the chapter where Chen Chongqing almost became an idiot. Chapter 388. Liang Wangsun was the first guest of this banquet. With his identity, strength, and status in the Jianghu, the court, and the world of cultivation, he absolutely had the right to be the guest of honor. Thus, Chen Chongqing wanted to kill him. Even if he knew that he was far from being a match, he still wanted to kill him. Only this way could he intimidate the entirety of Xuanyang City. Coupled with his status in the orthodoxy, only this way could he make people not dare to continue moving against Su Li. This was Chen Chongqing's arrangement. Only by killing could one save, and only by being unreasonable could one be reasonable. The long street outside the inn was quiet. The bright and beautiful light of spring shone upon the dust that had just settled on the surface of the street. With the sound of something breaking, Qin Chongsheng smashed through the window, bringing with him shattered stone and wood shavings. In the blink of an eye, he was on the street. The carriage of the Liang household was 2 stories high. In front of the inn, he broke through the window and arrived in the middle of the carriage. His feet had not landed on the carriage, but his dagger had already left its sheath and pierced towards the space between Liang Wangsuin's eyebrows. This strike was silent, without any power to speak of, nor could one sense any majestic ripples of true essence. It was like it had added an unremarkable brilliance to the bright and beautiful light of spring, yet it had shocked many people. Even Liang Wangsuin's expression had turned solemn. The sword intent of Qin Chongsheng's strike was extremely refined and powerful. It seemed to have already surpassed the existence of sword energy. The people on the street who saw this strike, whether they were the cultivators who dared to kill Su Li, the priests of the Orthodox Church of Shenyang City, the death-sworn of the Liang household, or those ordinary servants and maids who did not understand cultivation or the path of the sword, all felt their eyes become somewhat sore. That sore feeling came from Qin Chongsheng's sword intent, an incomparably sharp sword intent that also contained an innate pressure. His dagger was currently the new generation of the Dragon Cry sword. This strike of his was like a dragon emerging from the sea, its light illuminating the surroundings. It seemed unremarkable, but it was actually extremely like a sun, so piercing that everyone had to squint their eyes. Everyone was shocked. Only now did they realize that Qin Chongsheng's cultivation of the path of the sword had already reached such a level. Only Shui He and Liang Hongzhuang, who had fought against Qin Chongsheng, were mentally prepared and didn't have any reaction. Although Qin Chongsheng was already very famous and was viewed by many as one of the most talented youths of the younger generation of cultivators beneath Qiu Shanjun and Su Yurong, in the end, not many people had personally witnessed his cultivation level, especially in the north of Shenyang City. The cultivators here only knew that he was unordinary, but they didn't expect that at such a young age he had already cultivated to the peak of ethereal opening. What was even more frightening was that his attainments in the path of the sword were so profound. In this very short period of time, many people, including Bishop Hua Jiefu of Shenyang City, could not help but have a thought that would normally be impossible. Could it be that Qin Chongsheng's sword really could threaten Liang Wangsun? Sitting within the carriage and facing the edge of the sword, Liang Wangsun was able to perceive Qin Chongsheng's sword manifestation more vividly than anyone else on the street. Yet, what was puzzling was that Qin Chongsheng didn't move at all. He quietly looked at Qin Chongsheng's sword, his eyes calm and indifferent, giving off a noble and inviolable feeling. The Vajra pestle in his right hand suddenly shone brightly, instantly swallowing up the light on Qin Chongsheng's sword. Was this an almost perfect star domain? Just as Qin Chongsheng was thinking this, he suddenly felt that something was wrong, because his sword had very easily pierced through that light. Man and sword became one. When the dagger pierced through that light, he also entered that light. His 2 feet finally landed on the Liang household's carriage, stepping on solid ground. But his sword could not pierce through the space between Liang Wangsuin's eyebrows, but stopped right in front of it. At some point, Liang Wangsuin's left hand, which had been hanging by his side, had been raised, blocking Qin Chongsheng's dagger. He had only used 2 fingers to clamp down on this dagger. Those 2 fingers seemed rather delicate and soft, even somewhat like a woman's, but in reality they were like 2 mountains. Even if Qin Chongsheng's sword was a true dragon, it might still be caught between these 2 mountains, unable to advance. Before breaking through the window and unleashing his sword, Qin Chongsheng had made the most deductions and calculations for this battle, and they were all focused on how to find the weakness or flaw in Liang Wangsuin's star domain. He had not expected at all that Liang Wangsun had not even used his star domain, and had only used 2 fingers to stop his sword. Was this the confidence and dignity of an expert of the proclamation of liberation? Looking at Liang Wangsuin's dignified eyes, Qin Chongsheng suddenly felt his body grow somewhat cold. This person's strength and cultivation were too deep and unfathomable, far more powerful than he was. But the coldness in his body did not originate from this difference in strength, because he was still hiding something. His true sword had not yet pierced out, but rather came from some sort of vague feeling. Liang Wangsun did not use his star domain. It had nothing to do with confidence, nothing to do with contempt, and it probably did not want to humiliate him, because that did not fit with his status and bearing, and it was also not a mistake that a true expert would make. Then what exactly did he want to do? Just as expected, in the next moment, right before Qin Changsheng had no time to use his true sword, Liang Wangsun moved. With a slight movement of his spiritual sense, stardust danced on the black lotus carriage, and a strand of qi separated the two worlds. Liang Wangsun had used his star domain. At this moment, Qin Changsheng was in front of him, so he had also entered his star domain, or perhaps it could be said that he was trapped in his star domain. To a star condensation expert, the most important use of a star domain was to protect oneself from any attack. What was Liang Wangsun's intention in doing this? Qin Changsheng knew that his opponent's actions had a deeper meaning, but he could not understand it for a moment. However, his sword heart was not in disorder, his sword intent as steady as before. His right foot stepped forward, and the true essence in his body instantly began to fiercely blaze. Liang Wangsun's eyes grew even brighter, even more solemn, and even more serious. It was very obvious that he had sensed the explosive increase in Qin Changsheng's true essence, and also sensed the possible danger. Liang Wangsun knew that in a moment, Qin Changsheng's true sword would arrive. At this moment, he did not know that this sword was at least several thousand swords. He only knew that in a similar moment, Su Li would die. It would all take a moment, but Qin Changsheng might not be able to injure Liang Wangsun. But Liang Wangsun was very sure that Su Li would die. As a result, Qin Changsheng soon understood that he would not have the chance to wait for this moment to end. Because at the beginning of this moment, a snowflake had drifted down onto the carriage of the Liang household. Countless snowflakes had fallen onto the streets around the inn. In the middle of spring, Xuanyang City had suddenly experienced a snowfall. Qin Changsheng looked into Liang Wangsun's eyes and saw many emotions, but he did not see any killing intent. As a result, he understood that Liang Wangsun had never wanted to kill him from start to finish. Yes, even a person like Liang Wangsun would not want to kill the youth of the Orthodox Academy, deeply trusted and even favored by the Pope and Archbishop Melisha, unless it was absolutely necessary. He had taken the risk to use his star domain and leave Qin Changsheng on the carriage because he did not want Qin Changsheng to act. This battle was not between the two of them. The true killer of Su Li was someone else. Who was that person? Just who was the last guest to arrive at this banquet? The spring scenery had already been submerged in the snowstorm. A person suddenly descended from the snowy sky. It was a freak, his face covered in a sheet of white paper. 2 holes had been dug into the paper, revealing 2 eyes. The rest of the paper was a nose and a mouth drawn with simple lines. The freak's eyes were emotionless, devoid of spirit and devoid of love, but they were so cold that it made one feel incomparably crazy. A string was tied to the freak's waist. The other end of the string was in the sky, tied to an incomparably massive paper kite. That paper kite incessantly sprinkled paper to the ground. There was no wind or snow. The snowflakes fluttering through Xuanyang City were actually all paper. The freak's cultivation was terrifyingly strong, even though he was still several dozen zhang from the ground. His tyrannical and crazy qi had already reached the streets. Those cultivators with slightly weaker cultivations closed their eyes to resist, while those ordinary people directly fainted. In the blink of an eye, the black tiles and old eaves of the inn were completely crushed into rubble. With a muffled sound, the entire roof of the inn collapsed, the walls shattered, revealing the scene inside. In the dust and flying snow, the crowd could faintly make out the broken beams and furniture on the ground. In the ruins there was a chair. A middle-aged man sat on the chair, his hand holding an old-fashioned yellow paper umbrella. The streets were suddenly deathly still. This was the first time many people had seen Su Li's true appearance. The person descending from the sky thrust a spear at Su Li's body. The spear suddenly struck, the paper snow suddenly scattered, the wind and thunder stirred. The people around the inn cried out in alarm. Xiao Zhang! Painted armor Xiao Zhang! A person had ridden a kite to Xuanyang City to kill someone. He had sprinkled paper snowflakes ahead of time to send off the person he wanted to kill, because he believed that since he had come, that person would inevitably die, even if that person was Su Li. Besides, that madman ranked second on the Proclamation of Liberation. Who else could do such a crazy thing, to make such an arrogant entrance? Who else but painted armor Xiao Zhang could do it? The moment the spear appeared, Xuanyang City moved. This was Xiao Zhang's arrogant spear. Even if Su Li was not injured and his cultivation was at its peak, he would probably still have to seriously deal with it. Now that he had not recovered from his heavy injuries, how could he receive this spear? At this moment, Chen Chongsheng was trapped on the long street by Liang Wangsun. Who would block this spear for him? Not bad. Give it a like. Chapter 389. Amidst the rubble of the inn, Su Li sat on a chair with his eyes closed. He seemed to be asleep, but he was actually awake. His hand gripped the yellow paper umbrella, but he had no intention of unsheathing it. The metal spear descending from the sky was only several zhang away from him, and his black hair was already drifting in the wind. The peerless expert that had once been undefeatable was now finally forced into desperate straits. Who could save him? Su Li had no friends. He had also never trusted anyone, except the people of Mount Li. Yet Mount Li was too far away. In Xuanyang City, there was only Chen Chongsheng. The only person that could help him block this spear was Chen Chongsheng. Chen Chongsheng had to help him block this spear. Thus, something that exceeded everyone's expectations occurred. The street outside the inn suddenly became incomparably hot. The paper snow, drifting down from the sky, danced even faster, and some of the paper pieces that fell onto the carriage were even charred and rolled up. This heat came from Chen Chongsheng's body. He was using a method that was almost violent to burn his true essence. This was the second sword that Su Li had taught him, the blazing sword. Sword intent violently rose, filling up the entire space on the carriage. This violent sword style contained the soaring sword energy of the burning heaven sword, the peerless secret of the golden crow sword, and in the instant that true essence was burned, it also contained the determination and boldness of the final move of the Mount Li sword style. Die for a noble cause. This sword had originally been specially created by Su Li for him to surpass cultivation levels and battle experts. Back in the tea house by the official road, Chen Chongsheng's blazing sword had directly chopped the star condensation tyrant of the north, Lin Pingyuan, into a cripple. Even though Liang Wangsuan's strength was unfathomable, he was still somewhat moved by this sword. Liang Wangsun loosened his fingers and formed a sword seal, causing the Vajra pestle to howl. Chen Chongsheng's blazing sword did not truly stab out. He turned his wrist and withdrew his sword, then stabbed out once more. This time he did not stab at the space between Liang Wangsuan's eyebrows, but at the space in front of the carriage to the right. This sword seemed to be played down, but it was actually filled with profound meaning. The place where the tip of the sword pointed contained a great deal of knowledge. This was the first sword that Su Li had taught him, the intellectual sword. The intellectual sword required a vast amount of calculations, a talent for deduction, a brilliant sword heart, and very good luck for a star condensation expert like Liang Wangsun. His star domain could be said to be perfect. Even if Chen Chongsheng's strike came from inside out, it would still be extremely difficult to break through, so he was putting his life on the line. Perhaps it was because his luck was bad, or perhaps it was because his luck was too good. Whenever he risked his life, his luck was always good. With a soft sound, the dagger pierced a small hole in Liang Wangsuan's star domain. Qin Changsheng's figure suddenly disappeared. Releasing steam, he rolled up the paper and returned to the inn. This was the discerning step. The interior of the building was a mess. Su Li sat on a chair with his eyes closed, as if he was waiting for death. The iron spear pierced through the snowy sky and was about to stab his chest. Qin Changsheng appeared in front of Su Li. Everyone who saw him felt their eyes ache. This had nothing to do with the initial sword intent, but because his body was emitting a terrifying heat. No real flames could be seen on his body, but it gave people the feeling that he was burning. Facing this iron spear descending from the heavens, Qin Changsheng held his sword horizontally in front of him. The dagger did not brighten, nor did it reveal the might of a dragon. It seemed very ordinary, like stone, like sand. When stone and sand were mixed together, they could form an embankment. This iron spear that came from the snowy sky was incomparably terrifying and powerful, like an overflowing flood. As Qin Changsheng held his sword horizontally, a great embankment seemed to appear in front of the raging flood. This was the third sword that Su Li had taught him. This sword had a very stupid name. It was called the Stupid Sword. According to Su Li's words, this was a very stupid sword style, so only the stupidest of people could learn it. This was also a sword style of its most basic nature, because this sword could not be used to face an enemy, only to defend. The reason it was called the Stupid Sword was because there was no other way to learn this sword. It could only be practiced over and over again, practiced until the seas ran dry and the rocks crumbled, practiced until the stars changed and the stars moved, practiced until the heavens and the earth were unchanging. Yet there was no way to confirm whether or not one had learned it. When Qin Changsheng heard these words, he had no intention of learning this sword. Only when Su Li said that this stupid sword could be called the strongest defensive sword style in the world did he change his mind. The sword left Mount Li, and Su Li's attainments in the path of the sword were unparalleled. He was experienced and knowledgeable, so his judgment was naturally not wrong. But when he formally began to learn the stupid sword, he regretted it, because not even Su Li had succeeded in learning the sword. In all of Mount Li, in all of the continent, no one had succeeded in learning this sword. Even in the long river of history, no one had succeeded in learning this sword. In other words, this sword style only existed in books, existed in the imaginary path of the sword. It had never truly appeared. Su Li said that the reason he had not been able to learn this sword was because he was too talented. His sword heart was free and unrestrained, unwilling to be bound. However, Qin Changsheng really did have the possibility of learning this sword, because in certain aspects, Qin Changsheng really was very stupid. Qin Changsheng naturally would not believe his words, but he really did stupidly begin to learn this sword. He practiced day and night, and at a certain moment he even felt that he really had learned this sword. But there was no way to confirm this, because he had never tried it. Until now, the arrogant spear pierced through the snowy sky and descended. The myriad swords unleashing unison could not be used, because that freak riding the kite was clearly insane. In order to kill Su Li, he simply did not care if his body was pierced with thousands of holes. Qin Changsheng could only use this sword. Since he had to block the spear, he could only block it. He held his sword horizontally in front of him. As he watched the spear and the fluttering red tassel getting closer and closer, his mind was extremely nervous, his body incomparably stiff. But his sword heart was incomparably calm, and his expression even seemed somewhat lifeless. At this moment, the youth really did seem rather stupid. The red tassel danced, tearing through the paper snow. The spear arrived in the room, its bright and arrogant tip clashing with the dim and steady blade. In just an instant, the tip of the spear clashed with the dagger several thousand times. The fluttering pieces of paper on the end shattered into powder, and the snowfall grew even more intense, even more real. There was a massive boom. Waves of qi surged out from the inn. The paper snow spread out, enveloping an area of several hundred zhang in circumference. In the silence, a harsh and ear-piercing sound arose. It was the sound of iron scraping against iron. The spear slowly moved back. Qin Changsheng still stood in front of Su Li. His face was pale, his body incessantly trembling, especially his two legs. It seemed like in the next moment he would collapse, but he did not. He did not even retreat a single step. He himself did not know this, because that spear was truly too powerful, too terrifying. In the final moment he had even closed his eyes, and even now he still had not opened them. The effects of the violent combustion of true essence were still present. The temperature of his body was extremely high, incomparably scalding. Occasionally, a piece of paper would fall on his body and be ignited, emitting wisps of white smoke. It seemed rather strange. The crowd looked at Chun Changsheng, who was emitting white smoke, and were shocked speechless. In an impossible situation, he had forcefully broken through Liang Wangsuan's star domain, returned to the inn, and forcefully blocked that spear that had pierced through the air. Just how had this youth done it? It must be known that no matter how much of a genius he was still only 16 years old. Today he was not facing those opponents of the same age in the grand examination, but a true expert of the proclamation of liberation. Amazing to actually be able to block one of my spears. An emotionless voice resounded from within the building. Qin Changsheng opened his eyes, finally clearly seeing the freak that had arrived on a kite. This freak was rather thin and wore a shabby short garment, revealing half of his arms and calves. His face was covered by a piece of white paper. On the white paper was a drawing of a nose and a mouth, revealing only his two eyes. Qin Changsheng was indeed amazing. Everyone present thought so. Because he could block this person's spear, because this person was painted armor Xiaozhang. Starting from the Boiling Stone Summit 40 years ago, the cultivation world officially welcomed the era of blooming wildflowers. Countless geniuses poured out, but painted armor Xiaozhang had always been the most dazzling name. He was equally famous as Wang Po of Tianliang, a true expert of the human world. And in the eyes of many, he was even more terrifying than Wang Po of Tianliang, because he was a madman. Many years ago, after the Boiling Stone Summit, Wang Po took first place, while Sun Mei, Liang Wangsun, and the others were placed behind him. Xiaozhang was extremely unwilling, and in order to surpass Wang Po, he forcefully cultivated in some problematic technique. In the end, he suffered a cultivation defect and failed. Just when everyone believed that he would fall, who could have imagined that he would disperse all his cultivation and begin cultivating from the beginning? In just a few short years, he had once again entered the upper level of star condensation. Just how crazy and powerful was this will? Because of his cultivation deviation, Xiaozhang wasn't able to participate in the second year's grand examination. At the same time, his face was heavily injured, almost to the point of disfigurement. It was also from that moment onwards that his face was covered with a piece of white paper, never to be removed. The common people called him Painted Armor Xiaozhang, not only because the sect he came from was famous for its painted armor, but also because of this piece of white paper. It was said that at the time the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had once asked him why he did not use a mask. Xiaozhang replied that he used a piece of white paper to cover his face because he did not want to frighten children, and it was not because he was ashamed to meet people. So why did he need to use a mask? It was just that the Xiaozhang of that time probably could not have imagined that in the following 30-odd years, this piece of white paper on his face would bring fear to his opponents. This was Painted Armor Xiaozhang. He was very crazy and also very arrogant. His spear was unstoppable. With Qin Changsheng's current age and level of cultivation, for him to actually be able to block one of his spears was truly an unimaginable matter. At this moment, Liang Wangsun was also looking at Qin Changsheng. He thought about the sword that Qin Changsheng had used to stab at him, as well as the sword that had split open his star domain. He was somewhat confused. Why was the first sword so berserk? The second sword even seemed to be able to think, as if it had a life of its own. What sort of sword style was this? Why had he never seen it in the ancient records of the orthodoxy? Neither he nor Xiaozhang had imagined that this youth was even more powerful than the rumors said. When they first found out about the events that had occurred in the capital, such as the grand examination, these true experts did not think much of it. It must be known that in the grand examination 30-odd years ago, if they had also gone, snow-treading Sun would not have been able to obtain first place upon the first banner. Only when Chen Changsheng had comprehended all the monoliths of the front mausoleum in a single day in the mausoleum of books did they realize that Chen Changsheng's talent was astonishing. But how could it be so powerful? But no matter how powerful he was, there was still a limit. A light breeze brushed past the white paper, causing it to rustle. Just like that, Chen Changsheng collapsed, sitting on the dust-covered floor. He did not bleed, but his wrist bones were shattered. He sat in front of the chair, powerless to raise the sword in his hand. Liang Wangsun looked at the chair behind Chen Changsheng. Xiao Zhang also looked at the chair. They would not forget who sat in the chair, so they understood why Chen Changsheng's sword was so powerful. Su Li sat in the chair. At some point he had already opened his eyes. He raised his right hand and patted Chen Changsheng's head. He mocked. "You really are stupid." Chen Changsheng's voice was very weak, but it was still stubborn. "How am I stupid?" Su Li said, "Didn't you leave just now? What are you still doing here?" Chen Changsheng said, "If I leave, what will you do?" Su Li asked, "It's that simple." Chen Changsheng asked in confusion, "Could it not be that simple?" Su Li was silent for a while, then sighed with emotion. "No wonder Qiushan could not learn this sword. That girl of mine could not learn it. Even I myself could not learn it, but you did. I also very stupidly forced this chapter out slowly. Good night. I wish everyone a happy 16th of the first month." Chapter 390. Su Li then asked, "Just now, when you went downstairs, why didn't you bring the yellow paper umbrella?" The yellow paper umbrella's defensive abilities were extremely strong, able to resist the full-powered attack of a star condensation expert. In Wenshui, Chen Changsheng had heard Jishio mention this, but in these past few days, this umbrella had always been in Su Li's hands. Moreover, after that day in the snowy plains, he had always felt that this umbrella was a sword, and had never thought of this point. Now that he heard Su Li's words, he could not help but be stunned. He honestly admitted, "I forgot." Su Li sighed, truly stupid to death. As the two spoke, Xiao Zhang did not move, Liang Wangsun did not move, and the people in the streets around the inn did not move, because the person speaking was Su Li. In the past several hundred years, Su Li was the idol of countless people in the cultivation world, the sword spirit of the human world. He could be killed, but he could not be humiliated, because that was the same as humiliating the human world itself. At this moment, even the craziest Xiaozhang did not mind waiting for a while. The conclusion was already decided. Everyone in the world could be killed, and the only person standing in front of Su Li, Chen Changsheng, had already been defeated. The difference in strength between the two was too great in the era when the wildflowers of the cultivation world first bloomed. There were 4 strongest people. Snow-treading Sun Mei had died on the divine path of the mausoleum of books, leaving 3. 2 of them had come to Xuanyang City, so what could Chen Changsheng do? A broken wall behind the inn could not withstand the gentle breeze, and collapsed with a rumble. Dust rose once more. When the dust settled, the bishop of Xuanyang City, Hua Jifu, appeared in the inn. He looked at Chen Changsheng and solemnly said, "Sir is already unable to change anything, so why not let this matter end more peacefully?" Chen Changsheng lowered his head and said nothing. Su Li once more raised his right hand and patted his shoulder. Smiling, he said, "What kind of person am I? Could it be that a child like you is really prepared to stand guard by my side for the rest of your life? Chen Chongqing understood his meaning and struggled to move to the side. When the carriage of the Liang household arrived, he stood by the window. When Xiao Zhang's gun arrived, he stood in front of the chair. Even if he fell in front of the chair. He had already done his utmost. Now, at the final moment, whether out of respect or some other reason, he should let Su Li face this storm by himself. So he stepped aside. Su Li sat on the chair, holding the yellow paper umbrella. He looked at Xiao Zhang in front of him, Liang Wangsun on the carriage, and the people on the street. His expression was calm and indifferent, as if these people were just miscellaneous people. The sky over Xuanyang City grew somewhat gloomy. The paper snow had stopped, and a light rain suddenly began to fall. The streets in the drizzle were completely silent. No one spoke for a long time. Xiao Zhang tilted his head to look at Su Li, his eyes filled with an unprecedented focus and fanaticism, as if he was admiring an extremely valuable piece of porcelain, and soon after, this porcelain would be personally broken by him. The white paper on his face was wet by the rain and slightly deformed, which made him look even more comical and terrifying. The next moment he trembled slightly, and the sound of iron wire being knocked could be heard from behind the white paper. How interesting! Even someone like you can die. As he said these words, Xiao Zhang's voice trembled even more. He was very excited and also somewhat perplexed. He was excited because he was about to personally witness and participate in an important turning point in history, but the reason for his perplexed expression was even more complicated. Su Li looked at him like he was looking at a wounded little beast. He said with pity, "Every person has to die. You don't even understand such a simple principle? Everyone says that I'm somewhat interesting in your madness. But why do you seem like an idiot now?" If someone else had called him an idiot, Xiao Zhang would definitely have immediately gone mad. He would not stop until he had tortured the other party to death. But now that he heard Su Li's words, he did not even get angry. On the contrary, his eyes became incomparably sincere. He said, "Look, if the people here today aren't bastards, then they're trash. Dying at their hands is so meaningless." Su Li said unhappily, "Are you really an idiot? Dying at anyone's hands is meaningless." Xiao Zhang stuck out his chest and said, "What do you think of me? Dying at my hands is always a bit more interesting." Chen Chongqing could not help but ask, "Is this interesting?" They were all saying the same thing, but they were not the same thing. Xiao Zhang looked at him, his eyes suddenly cold, but his voice became even more deranged. He yelled, "Of course it's interesting. He's Su Li. How can he die at the hands of those trash? Of course, he can only die under my spear." Yes, in the minds of many people, even if he could not fight, even if he was heavily injured and almost crippled, Su Li was still Su Li. In this world, he had never existed ordinarily. So how could he leave so ordinarily? Chen Chongqing was speechless, but Su Li himself had something to say. "I object." He looked at the crowd inside and outside the inn and said very solemnly and seriously, "No matter how I die, I don't agree." The drizzling streets became absolutely silent once more, but the atmosphere was different from before. This silence came from astonishment. Not everyone had seen Su Li, and no one had thought that the legendary junior martial uncle of Mount Li was actually this kind of person. In the final moments of his life, he still seemed so undisciplined and frivolous, without the slightest demeanor of a legendary figure. Objection overruled. Liang Wangsun walked into the ruins of the inn and looked at Su Li in the chair. After a moment of silence, he bowed and said, 10-odd years ago, when you killed 300 people of my estate, you should have known that this day would come." Then he looked at Chen Chongqing next to Su Li and said, "Just now I said that using a life for a life is the fairest thing, not to mention that this life of his is the repayment of 300 lives." Su Li pushed his disheveled black hair behind his shoulder and said very unconcernedly, "Whatever you say." Hearing this word, Chen Chongqing inexplicably thought of Luoluo, and then he thought of that assassination in the Orthodox Academy. He thought of that demon assassin, he thought of Black Robe, and he thought of that battle in the snowy plains. As a result, he still persisted in his belief that this was unfair, but he no longer had the ability to persist in his opinion. The rain slowly fell, floating like silk or a bowstring. Several hundred gazes looked at the ruins of the inn, at Su Li in the chair. They were scorching yet cold, pleased yet respectful. Su Li's left hand gripped the yellow paper umbrella, but his right hand still had no intention of gripping the handle. From the snowy plains to Xuanyang City, through tens of thousands of li of wind and snow, dust and road, people had already confirmed countless times that the news was true. Su Li was indeed heavily injured and had no strength to fight, but still no one dared to look down on him. In the past several hundred years, Black Robe had personally arranged the most terrifying assassination of the demons, but it had still not killed him. How could such a person die so easily? Miracle seemed to be a word that nature had created for a person like him. The streets were deathly still, the atmosphere oppressive and tense. No one knew when Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun would make their move. Just at this moment, someone made the first move. A stone soaked by the rain flew over from the street and smashed into Su Li's face. There was a muffled slap. A stream of blood flowed down from Su Li's forehead. Chen Chongsheng no longer had the strength to help him block this stone. Su Li himself also did not have the strength to block this stone, nor could he even dodge it. A legendary expert that could kill a demon general with a single strike and destroy a star condensation expert with a single glance could not even dodge a single stone. The streets were still quiet, but the atmosphere suddenly became somewhat different. In the drizzle came a burst of loud laughter. Everyone looked over and realized that it was the sect master of the Star Mystery Sect, Lin Songhai. It was precisely him who had thrown that stone. Lin Songhai looked up at the inn and laughed with resentment and delight. Su Li, even you have a day like this. Even a dog knows how to dodge a stone, but right now you're actually not even as good as a dog. In the drizzle, Su Li's clothes were completely soaked, his face pale and blood slowly flowing. He seemed very miserable. Seeing this scene, although everyone had come to kill Su Li, their moods were all different. I caught a cold. If I'm still this dizzy tomorrow, I might need to rest for a day. I'm telling everyone in advance. Chapter 391. The majority of the people in the streets around the inn were ethereal opening cultivators, and a small number had already succeeded in star condensation. In the cultivation world, they could already be considered experts, and to ordinary people, they were lofty existences. However, in the past, to Su Li, these people were nothing more than a group of ants. It was just that, when faced with the swagger of these ants, they could no longer make any response. They could only lower their heads in the rain. Su Li silently gazed at the blood that flowed from the corner of his eyebrows to his chest. His face that had been washed by the rain was somewhat pale. This was because of his injuries, or perhaps it was also related to his emotions. A feeling of desolation spread out along with the rain that fell on the ruins of the inn. Just as Chen Chongxing had said, if he had not fought with the demons, how could he have suffered such heavy injuries? After leaving the snowy plains, he had been constantly pursued until he was finally trapped in Xuanyang City. How could he have been humiliated by these people? How could he even die at the hands of these people in a little while? How could this reality not make people grieve, even to the point of desolation? In the distance of the long street, Shui, he slightly raised his eyebrows. He was extremely displeased with the words and actions of the sect master of the Star Mystery Sect. The red cloud qilin that he was holding on to lowered its head, allowing the rain to drip down from its fiery red mane, as if it could not bear to see what would happen next. Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun maintained their silence. The bishop of Xuanyang City, Hua Jiefu, used his eyes to signal, and a priest walked into the crowd. He arrived in front of the sect master of the Star Mystery Sect, Lin Songhai, and said a few words in a low voice. The resentful and joyful laughter stopped. Lin Songhai looked at the people on the second floor of the inn and sneered, "If he can be killed, What does it matter if I humiliate him a few words? Truly hypocritical. He was the sect master of the Star Mystery Sect, and his family was a tyrant of the North. His cultivation was also high, already at the middle level of star condensation. As a result, he had developed an arrogant and despotic temperament. He did not fear anyone, so how could he be willing to miss the chance to humiliate Su Li? Su Li raised his head and looked down at the inn. He pushed his rain-soaked hair to the back, his expression calm, as if he had not been affected by the flying rock in the rain or the previous insults. Who are you? If it were in the past, perhaps your actions really would have been a form of humiliation. But now, you're not even comparable to a drowning dog. What need is there for you to put on a brave front? It's just a joke. Lin Songhai looked at the upper floor of the inn, sneered, and said, "A few days ago on the roadside, you killed my Lin family's eldest son and dozens of my Lin family's elites. Today you will pay for this life." Su Li glanced at Qin Chongsheng. Only now did Qin Chongsheng know that this person was a relative of the Northern Land's great hero, Lin Pingyuan. On his way south, he had fought under Su Li's guidance and killed a few people. Only when he killed Lin Pingyuan did he feel any mental obstruction, because Lin Pingyuan was a bandit who did all sorts of evil, a thief whose hands were stained with the blood of the innocent. He said, "I killed Lin Pingyuan." Lin Songhai was slightly startled. Not waiting for him to say anything, Qin Chongsheng continued, "If you want revenge, you should come to kill me." Lin Songhai's expression changed slightly. Still not waiting for him to speak, Qin Chongsheng stared into his eyes and continued, "But I know you don't dare to come and kill me, because I am the principal of the Orthodox Academy. How would you dare to touch me?" Lin Songhai's heart trembled slightly. Qin Chongsheng finally said, "So if I can survive today, I will definitely think of a way to kill you." At this moment he was truly very angry, so he spoke very seriously. A chill surged through Lin Songhai's body. He had a rather high status in the cultivation world, especially in the northern continent, but how could he compare to the orthodoxy? With Qin Chongsheng's status and position in the orthodoxy, if he truly wanted to deal with him, how could he and his sect withstand it? He suddenly felt very regretful. In a daze, he yelled out to his surroundings, "Just because the orthodoxy can use its power to bully others!" After yelling these words, he had originally thought that he would receive some support. It must be known that everyone had come to kill Su Li, so they should all be on the same side. Yet he had not expected that no one in the streets would pay any attention to him. Only now did he understand. Everyone had come to kill Su Li, but no one dared to offend the Li Palace, so naturally no one dared to offend Qin Chongsheng. "Why are you like a child, saying such childish things?" Su Li did not even pay attention to Lin Songhai on the street. He looked at Qin Chongsheng and said, "For something like killing, it's better to just do it directly. There's no need to make any advance warning." Qin Chongsheng said nothing. He took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and carefully wiped away the rain and blood on Su Li's face. "But it's also reasonable for you to be angry. For something like throwing stones, it's too childish, too vulgar, and meaningless." Su Li allowed him to wipe away the blood and said somewhat vaguely. On the side, Xiaozhang said, "Correct, it really is very meaningless." Su Li said, "Then make way." Xiaozhang said nothing, and without the slightest hesitation he opened up a path that led from the ruins of the second floor of the inn to the streets. Many people noticed this and were somewhat confused. Lin Songhai was even more so. He looked at Su Li and sneered, "You old dog that can't even crawl, what are you going to do?" Su Li expressionlessly looked at him. The left hand holding the yellow paper umbrella suddenly moved. The thumb of his left hand pushed towards the handle of the umbrella. With a crack, the handle of the umbrella was slightly pulled out. The handle of the umbrella was the hilt of the sword. In the yellow paper umbrella was the heaven shrouding sword. The sword was half unsheathed. At this time, Lin Songhai was still cursing in the street with obscenities such as dead dog. Suddenly, his voice came to a screeching halt. An extremely thin sword mark had appeared on his throat, and blood slowly seeped out from it. The people closest to him saw this scene, and their faces instantly paled. They were shocked, speechless. However, Lin Songhai did not seem to know that his throat had already been cut. He still pointed at the second floor of the inn and cursed, but there was no longer any sound to be heard. The scene was extremely strange and terrifying. After a moment, he finally reacted. He subconsciously touched his throat. When he pulled his hand back, he only saw a patch of bright red, and then he felt an intense pain. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with fear and confusion. He painfully howled, but he was unable to howl. He turned around and wanted to escape from the inn, but as soon as he took a step back, he discovered that his 2 legs had already been cut off at the knees. Lin Songhai fell heavily into a pool of blood. He clutched his throat and gurgled. His 2 legs had already been cut off at the knees. Seeing this scene, the crowd scattered in fear, distancing themselves from him. Not too long after, Lin Songhai stopped struggling and died. But after he breathed his last, he still could not close his eyes. His eyes were filled with fear and confusion. He did not understand just what had happened. Su Li was heavily injured and on the verge of death. He was just an old dog that could not crawl. So how could he still kill him with a single strike? There were many people who were just as shocked, terrified, and confused as Lin Songhai. The street became deathly still once more. The crowd gazed at the ruins of the second floor of the inn, at the man in the chair, filled with reverence and unease. He really was worthy of being called the most powerful master of the sword in the last several hundred years. Even though he seemed to be on his last breath, a single strand of sword intent was still so powerful that it could kill a star condensation expert. Chen Chongqing was somewhat stunned, and then he felt relieved, feeling very pleased. Senior was right. For a matter like killing, one truly only needed to do it without any warning. The handle of the umbrella gradually returned, Su Li's edge gradually receding, and he once again became an ordinary middle-aged man. He sat on the chair, gazing at Lin Songhai, who had fallen dead on the street. He expressionlessly said, "Although I can't crawl anymore, killing a person like you with a single strike is still not difficult." Liang Wangsuan's expression was abnormally grave. Xiao Zhang's eyes hidden behind the white paper grew more and more fanatical. This strike was truly too powerful, worthy of being Su Li. Su Li truly did not disappoint the sword. This is the sword. Xiao Zhang looked at him, not concealing his admiration or even adoration. This strike of yours is completely capable of heavily injuring one of us. So why did you use it on such a worthless piece of trash? Because I hate this kind of fly the most. It's very annoying, so I killed it and finished it. As for you and Liang Wangsun, I don't really hate you, so why did I kill you? Of course, the most important thing is that in these several dozen days, I only saved up this 1 strike. Su Li said, "If I could save up 2 strikes and kill the 2 of you at the same time, then I would naturally save up a little." After a moment of silence, Liang Wangsun said, "I will not accept your kindness." Xiao Zhang said, "Admirable, admirable." People of this level would not waste words. 2 words of admiration naturally meant that they admired 2 things. He admired Su Li's sword. He admired Su Li even more for using this strike to kill Lin Songhai and not on them. This signified that, to Su Li, pleasure would forever be more important than gratitude or enmity. Living like this was truly very interesting. Today is the first day of quitting smoking. All sorts of discomfort. It will definitely affect my writing. I've been writing for 12 years. Old readers probably remember how many times I've quit smoking. Every time, I'm serious, but I always end up in failure. But I still refuse to admit defeat. I still want to win. Life is just like that. I hope I can succeed this time. because I feel that challenging myself is the greatest meaning of living. I encourage everyone and ask for your support. Also, I might have written a little crudely recently. From the day after tomorrow, I will update twice. Chapter 392. The people in the streets of Xuanyang City were all stunned by Su Li's sword. Even someone as insane as Xiao Zhang could not help but express his admiration. But Chen Changsheng didn't think so. On the contrary, he felt a little sad. In the eyes of the crowd, Su Li held the yellow paper umbrella in his hand and pierced through the rain with his sword. He had easily and noiselessly beheaded a star condensation expert. This was truly a cultivation and realm that could shock the world. But when he left the garden of Zhou for the snowy plains, he had once seen Su Li's true sword. At that time, Su Li also held the yellow paper umbrella in his hand, but the handle was not completely unsheathed. Sword intent pierced through the snow, traveling several dozen li. A demon general on the edge of the snowy plains fell to the ground, its mountainous shadow abruptly severed. Compared to that demon general, what did a scoundrel like Lin Songhai count for? Compared to that sword from back then, what was this sword in the rain in Xuanyang City? After several dozen days in the south, Su Li had finally managed to save up a single strike. It was not even a tenth of his peak, but it still possessed a heaven-shaking might. If he could return to his peak, no, even if his injuries were slightly lighter, just who could kill him? Who would dare to kill him? Unfortunately, there was only cold reality in the human world. There were no ifs. Everything was really over after this sword. No one else is coming. Su Li gazed at Xuanyang City in the rain, at the guests that had come to participate in this banquet. After a very long time, he shook his head and calmly said, "It seems that no one else will come." The question was asked by him, and the answer was answered by him. Between the question and the answer, there was an indescribable sense of vicissitudes and disappointment. His expression was still as indifferent as before. He said to Qin Changsheng, "You see, in the end, reality proved that I was right." Qin Changsheng remained silent, thinking that there was no point in arguing about this now. Su Li's expression became serious, and his tone was also extremely heavy. "Other than an idiot like you, or perhaps an idiot who would help others for no reason, who in this world can be trusted?" Even now, no one from the Mount Li Sword sect had come, not even a word. The other sects of the Longevity sect and Holy Maiden Peak also remained silent. The South was admittedly far away, but words and attitudes should not have had enough time to appear in Xuanyang City, to appear before the people of the world. Sadly, those words and attitudes didn't appear. Perhaps this indicated the attitude of the entire human world toward Su Li. Regardless of North or South, regardless of the people, they all wanted him dead. As he gazed at the silent Su Li in the rain, Qin Changsheng suddenly felt very sad. His nose was somewhat sore, his eyes somewhat dry, and his voice somewhat tense. Perhaps something has happened to Mount Li. The so-called legends were often lonely when they came to an end. But Qin Changsheng could not bear to see the scene. Whether it was in the stories or in the classics of the orthodoxy, he did not like to see the words "the banquet is over." He did not want Su Li to depart so sorrowfully. Su Li looked at him and smiled. "You idiot, is that supposed to be comforting?" In the rain, Xuanyang City was quiet and slightly cold, growing colder and colder. The sound of a zither suddenly came from somewhere in the distance. He didn't know who was playing the zither. Perhaps it was a musician from the Liang household, or perhaps it was Liang Hongzhuang's bosom friend. The sound of the zither was sobbing, and the singing was hoarse. One could vaguely hear the words "loyal soul" and "old city," but they couldn't be clearly heard. Liang Hongzhuang remained silent as he listened to the song. His tattered dancing clothes fluttered in the wind and rain as he walked away with his sleeves behind his back. Shui, he led the red cloud Qilin, bowed silently towards the inn, and turned to leave. The sound of the zither gradually faded, the singing gradually faded, and then, "Yeah!" Xiao Zhang bellowed. The white paper covering his face rustled. The spear stabbed straight at Su Li. Liang Wangsun held the Vajra scepter in his hand. His steps were as heavy as a lotus, and his expression was as smooth as jade. His aura enveloped the entire inn. A violent gale arose, and Chun Chongsheng was thrown onto the ground, unable to get up. The song was about to end. That was the day of Su Li's death. However, someone refused to let the song stop. It was not Liang Hongzhuang, who had turned around and left, dancing in rags. It wasn't divine General Shui, who returned with a broken armor and a qilin. It wasn't that the musicians in the mansion wanted to continue playing, and it wasn't that a soulmate wanted to play to the end of the world. That zither sound, that song, had indeed ended. However, in the inn, or more accurately, below the inn, there was a clear sound of impact, like the sound of wood, like the sound of a bamboo zither. In short, it continued this zither song. The clear and melodious sound of impact rang out rhythmically, as if it had given the song a new life. Liang Hongzhuang and Shui He, who had parted ways on the long street, stopped at the same time. They suddenly turned around to look at the inn, their faces filled with shock. Pa! Pa pa! Pa pa pa! Just what sort of object was making this sound? The counter below the inn was very old, its paint peeling off. There was an abacus on it. The beads of the abacus were incessantly striking. The person fiddling with the beads was no longer at the counter. With a clear sound of impact, several dozen white streams of air appeared in the ruins of the inn. Seeing those streams of air, Liang Wangsuan's expression was solemn. His imperial robe whistled, and his eyes shone like stars. Xiao Zhang's expression instantly became incomparably shocked, and then it exploded. Chila! The floorboards between the first and second floors of the inn were like fragile paper, shattering just like that. A blade broke through the floorboards, breaking through several dozen balls of qi. With an incomparably terrifying howl, it chopped at Xiao Zhang. Xiao Zhang's entrance had been so arrogant, but this blade was even more arrogant, because this blade had no intention of blocking his spear. It was chopping at the person behind the spear. This was clearly telling Xiao Zhang, "My blade will definitely be faster, heavier, and fiercer than your spear. Before your spear can kill Su Li, my blade will definitely chop off your head." Seeing this blade chopping at him, Xiao Zhang was shocked and then angry. He recognized this blade. He knew that this blade had been personally forged by the Wenshui Old Master and had been gifted to him for free. He also knew that although this blade seemed ordinary, it actually possessed a might that even gods and ghosts would find difficult to block. He wanted to say something, but he realized that it was difficult for him to make a sound. The blade whimpered, like the weeping of a poor scholar, like the weeping of a child whose home had been ruined. This blade was very angry. Xiao Zhang had clashed with this blade countless times. After Sun Mei entered the Mausoleum of Books, he was the one who had clashed with this blade the most. Of course, he was also the one who had lost the most, but he had never seen such a terrifying saber before. The dark clouds in the sky above Xuanyang City seemed to have been cut open, and a blue sky could faintly be seen. Xiao Zhang knew that he could not retreat, or else he would assuredly lose to this blade. It was even possible that his Tao heart and his will to fight would be shattered by this angry blade, and he would become a cripple for the rest of his life. His two hands tightly gripping the spear, he smashed it horizontally at the blade. A loud bang resounded. The white paper floated in the air, blood dripping onto it. Xiao Zhang flew backwards, blood spurting from his mouth as he crashed into the courtyard across from the inn. In the dust and rubble, his roar of anger and unwillingness resounded. "Wang Pa, you actually launched a sneak attack. Writing a novel while quitting smoking is definitely one of the most painful things in the world. For me to be able to hold on and write it, this chapter is not bad. I admire myself very much. Tomorrow I want to write 2 chapters, but I suddenly realize that this is really very difficult. It's really uncomfortable to the point of dying." Chapter 393. A clear whistle resounded through the inn. Liang Wangsun finally moved, rushing in front of that person. His movement technique was open and above board like a crouching tiger or coiling dragon. It floated over, yet it was as heavy as a mountain. In his hand, he held a golden pestle that emitted boundless light like the spring sun, warm and mellow. In short, whether it was his movement technique or his technique, they both had the bearing of a king, making it impossible for others to think of dodging. This was the first time Liang Wangsun had truly moved. His eyes were incomparably bright, his expression incomparably solemn, and he had used his most powerful technique. Because he was keenly aware of how powerful his opponent was, Qin Chongqing's heart shivered. He thought to himself, if Liang Wangsun had used such a powerful technique on the carriage, would he still have had the chance to break through this light and return to the inn? With his current level of cultivation, he simply had no way of dealing with Liang Wangsun's technique of light because this technique was too bright, upright, and peerless. He could not break through it, nor could he respond. He could only forcefully endure it, stubbornly endure it, and then die. Because this was Liang Wangsun's most powerful technique, even that person could not avoid it, could not break it. That person chose to forcefully receive it. A palm broke through the falling rain. In front of Su Li and Chen Chongqing, it noiselessly and swiftly arrived in front of them, blocking Liang Wangsun's Vajra pestle. That palm was very slender, very suitable for holding a blade, but the center of the palm seemed rather thick. It was very clear that it had held the blade for too long, or perhaps it was precisely because of this that this palm very easily gripped the tip of the Vajra pestle. It was like gripping the hilt of a blade. Boundless light completely converged between the 5 fingers. 2 powerful qis, 2 almost perfect star domains, met in this grip. Just at this moment, an angry roar came from the other side of the street. Xiao Zhang shot back like a flying stone, carrying his body covered in dust and rain, carrying a sky full of gravel as he rushed to the inn. The metal spear thrusted again with wind and thunder. After being injured, Xiao Zhang became even crazier. The white paper covering his face was covered in specks of blood, contrasting with his eyes. They were incomparably serene and terrifying, and even possessed a violent qi that blazed brighter than the sun. That person stood in front of Su Li and Qin Chongqing, his left hand gripping the Vajra pestle. He looked at Liang Wangsun calmly and attentively, as if he had not even noticed Xiao Zhang's tyrannical return. However, the moment the spear fell, his sleeves moved. Amidst the drizzle and breeze, his green sleeves rippled slightly. Then, the momentum of his saber rose again. That person brandished his blade and chopped down at Xiao Zhang. His movements were abnormally simple. It could be said that he swung his blade freely, but it could also be said that he played it down. It even gave off a feeling that he didn't care at all. It was still the spear that rose first, and the momentum of the saber followed. However, the edge of the saber was not aimed at the spear, but at Xiao Zhang, the pale white paper behind the spear. This was because the seemingly ordinary saber was faster and stronger than the tyrannical spear. Xiao Zhang was furious, unwilling, pained, and crazed, but he had no choice but to raise his spear and block. In this world, not many people could block Xiao Zhang's spear. In this world, there was only this person who would never block his gun and would only force him to use his gun to block. Therefore, Xiao Zhang hated this person very much. Whenever he saw him, he would feel extremely irritated and pained. A loud boom resounded. The spear and the saber met again in the inn. At this time, Liang Wangsun's radiance was still in that person's hand, still burning, still releasing energy. The names of these 3 people were all the most resounding names in the world. After being separated for so long, they had finally met in Xuanyang City. 3 terrifying qis met in this place. 3 powerful domains met in this place. The edge of the blade pierced through the air. The energy of the spear wanted to tear apart the heavens, and light enveloped the surroundings. Waves of qi gushed out of the inn, and a gale suddenly arose in Xuanyang City. Yet the ruins of the inn were strangely quiet. There was no wind, not even a sound. Liang Wangsuin's eyes were as bright as stars, but the hair at his temples was already wet. The white paper on Xiao Zhang's face was like an unmoving mountain, but blood was walking on it like the traces of worms. That person stood in front of Su Li and Chen Changsheng, one hand gripping the blade, the other gripping the pestle. It was like he was standing in front of the doorstep, but it was impossible to tell whether he was going to open the door or close it. In the end, his saber fell, so it was closing the door. The uninvited guest was invited out of the doorstep. The blade descended with an unstoppable momentum. Not even Xiao Zhang could stop it. The owner of the spear trembled and buzzed. Xiao Zhang was forced to retreat once more. The blade followed him the entire time. The white paper fluttered, and the kite flew off to some unknown place. Xiao Zhang retreated the entire way, destroying countless courtyards. The edge of the blade descended, and thunder boomed without end, resounding through all of Xuanyang City. Everywhere, houses collapsed. Dust flew everywhere, and dust flew everywhere. Only Xiao Zhang's figure could be faintly seen. Finally, Xiao Zhang suppressed the blade energy of this blade and steadied his feet. At this moment, he was already in the western part of the city, 7 li from the inn. He gazed at the distant inn and let out a furious yell. "Wang Pai, you've gone mad!" The blade left his hand. That person had no weapon. He did not need a weapon. His left hand still gripped the Vajra pestle. Liang Wangsuin's boundless light was grasped in his hand. He gazed at Liang Wangsun, his eyes carrying an undisguised fierceness. Retreat or defeat. Liang Wangsuin's eyes grew brighter and brighter, like stars on the verge of destruction. As the descendant of a sovereign, his glory and pride lay in not retreating a single step. That person understood, so he said no more and clenched his hand. Clenching was clenching the blade. Clenching the blade was clenching the fist. The person punched, gathering the light in the center of the fist and then smashing it. There was a massive boom, like spring thunder from a very distant place, like a gushing spring at the bottom of an abyss. In reality, it was the annihilation of the energy between his fingers. Liang Wangsuin's face instantly paled and the light in his eyes rapidly dimmed, like the stars had lost their luster. He stared at that person, his face filled with disbelief. In shock, he asked, "You've gone mad." The edge of the blade descended and thunder boomed. The fist shattered the light and thunder boomed. Countless peals of thunder resounded through Xuanyang City. The loudest peal of thunder came from that person's body. Boom! A fierce gale blew, a crushing chi, and then finally completely collapsed. Broken stones and tiles flew everywhere. Countless people were hit and fell down one after another. Dust flew everywhere, and soon after it was drenched by the rain. Seeing that the building had collapsed, the people that had originally been in the building had already appeared in the rainy sky. The people that had originally been on the second floor had now come to the ground. Su Li was still sitting in his chair, as if he had not noticed at all. Xiao Zhang walked over from the other end of the rainy street. A corner of the white paper on his face had already rotted away, revealing the terrifying wound beneath. The hand that gripped the spear incessantly trembled. Liang Wangsuin's face was snow white. The hand that gripped the Vajra pestle was similarly trembling. That person was still as silent as ever, as calm as ever. He was dressed in black, somewhat thin and tall. He was quiet and taciturn, his eyebrows slightly drooping, and his entire body was lonely. For some reason, seeing him made one feel wretched. It was not ordinary wretchedness, but the wretchedness after riches and honor, the bleakness after blooming. He did not look around, nor was he proud. He only stood in front of Su Li and Chen Changsheng. But even if painted armor Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun joined hands, they still could not pass, because he was Wangpa. First, on the proclamation of liberation, Wang Pe of Tianliang. The next chapter will definitely be very, very late. I'm warning you in advance. Chapter 394. Several decades ago, a young man appeared in Tianliang County. His name was Wang Pe. From the day he appeared, the era of blooming wildflowers in the cultivation world had officially arrived. He was a genius in cultivation and also a genius in battle. Whether it was cultivation talent or battle ability, he would forever be the strongest amongst the cultivators of his generation. After Zhou Dufu, he was the only one who had surpassed the cultivation of his generation, undoubtedly the strongest expert. From the proclamation of azure sky to the proclamation of golden distinction, and then to the proclamation of liberation, he was first place in all of them. He was even more glorious than Qiu Shanjun and Su Yurong. Whether it was the snow-treading Sun Mei who had obtained first place on the first banner in the grand examination, or Liang Wang's son, who had burst forth with the inheritance of a noble clan after 1,000 years of accumulation, none of them could even catch a glimpse of his back. Because of him, Sun Mei had bitterly cultivated in the mausoleum of books for more than 30 years, unable to leave. In order to surpass him, painted armor Xiao Zhang, famed for his arrogance and madness, had even suffered chi deviation and almost become a cripple. He had already cultivated to the peak of star condensation, only below the 5 saints and the storms of the 8 directions. Other than a peerless expert like Su Li who traveled the 4 seas, or a legend of the previous generation like divine General Han Qing, no one was stronger than him, and it could not be forgotten that he had only formally begun cultivating a few decades ago. The human world looked favorably upon him as someone who could enter the saint realm and become the next saint, or perhaps replace one of the storms of the 8 directions. It was even highly possible that he could go even further and enter the legendary concealed divinity realm. The street was deathly still. The crowd looked at the blue-clothed middle-aged man in the ruins of the inn, not daring to make a sound. On one end of the street, Liang Hongzhuang had an abnormally complex expression. As he thought of the events of many years ago, his charming and unmanly face flushed with an unhealthy red, his mind clearly agitated. On the other end of the street, divine General Xue, he looked at the blade in Chen Chongqing's hand and thought of the words Su Li had said to him a few days ago. His heart was filled with an indescribable sense of defeat. At the time, he had asked Su Li why the people of the world believed that he could not catch up to Wang Pe. Su Li had told him that whether it was the blade or the person, he was too far away from Wang Pe. When he asked for the reason, Su Li said it was because he wanted to use 7 blades, while Wang Pe only used 1. This answer seemed to make him understand something, but it was only when he saw the blade in Wang Po's hand send Xiao Zhang flying twice and cause the walls of Xuanyang City to collapse that he realized that Su Li's answer had been perfunctory. That he was inferior to Wang Pe had nothing to do with how many sabers he used. Even if Wang Pe was willing to use 365 sabers and change a saber every day, he would still be inferior to Wang Pe. The difference in cultivation level between him and Wang Pe was too great. This had nothing to do with willpower, it was only related to talent. This kind of understanding made one feel despair and sorrow. Wang Po's appearance had dealt an enormous mental blow to Liang Hongzhuang and Xue He, who were preparing to leave. It had also placed an enormous pressure on all of Xuanyang City, especially on those people within the city that wanted to kill Su Li, so much so that the city was deathly still. Only Qin Changshan, amidst his shock, felt an infinite warmth. Yes, not ecstasy, but warmth. Ecstasy was oftentimes a pleasant surprise that came from the unexpected. Warmth, more peaceful, more profound, more lasting. It was a kind of gratification when one's thoughts and wishes perfectly coincided with reality. He did not know why Wang Pe had appeared in Xuanyang City, but he thanked Wang Pe for his appearance. For Su Li, for himself, for those naive and childish thoughts. He thanked Wang Pe for his appearance. Just at this moment, Wang Po's body slightly swayed, and then he began to cough. He coughed up blood, and each mouthful of blood contained spirit and vigor. Everyone could see that with each cough, he became a little more exhausted and haggard. Even if he was Wang Pe when confronting opponents on the level of Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun, especially when fighting one against two, it was still difficult to say that he was certain of victory. In order to force them back with a single blade, he had used an extremely forceful method. So much so that he had received injuries that he should not have received. A light breeze blew across the ruins of the inn. The white paper on Xiao Zhang's face flapped, but the bewilderment in his eyes did not disperse. Liang Wangsuan's expression was unprecedentedly solemn, but at the same time it was also filled with intense shock and confusion. In the battle, Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun had both cried out in alarm. They felt that Wang Pe had gone mad. They were both people on the proclamation of liberation and had often sparred with each other since they were young. In truth, they were very familiar with Wang Pe. They knew Wang Po's personality, Wang Po's cultivation, Wang Po's camp, Wang Po's likes and dislikes, and Wang Po's style of doing things. They knew that although Wang Pe was now half the master of scholarly manner, he had never considered himself a southerner. Moreover, Wang Pe could not possibly have the slightest favorable impression of Mount Li. Crucially, Wang Pe did not like Su Li. Su Li was too undisciplined, like a cloud, while Wang Pe was too self-disciplined, like an account book that had been flipped through countless times. Why had he saved Su Li? They were both peak star condensation experts, so they were well aware of Wang Po's cultivation. Wang Po was naturally ridiculously strong, but it was absolutely impossible for him to so casually defeat the two of them working together, even inflicting injuries that they could not recover from in a short period of time. The only possibility was that Wang Pe had used his most forceful method, so much so that he had also been heavily injured. Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun were currently heavily injured and had no strength to continue fighting. Wang Pe seemed to still have strength to spare, but in reality he had paid even more, even possibly affecting his future cultivation career. Why? Why had he been so forceful and resolute, not caring about the price? Why was he willing to pay such a large price for a southerner? Why did you save him? The white paper was speckled with blood, like plum blossoms, making Xiao Zhang's eyes seem all the more bloodthirsty and fearful. He stared fixedly at Wang Pe, feeling the true essence wreaking havoc in his meridians. His voice was hoarse, filled with anger and confusion. Wang Pe was somewhat tired, and the ends of his eyebrows drooped even more, making him seem even more wretched. Coupled with his blue clothes that had been washed so many times that they were faintly white, he really did look like an accountant in an ordinary inn. He asked Xiao Zhang in reply, "Why did you kill him?" Xiao Zhang did not pretend to think. He confidently replied, even grandly and grandly, "Because I don't like him." Wang Po was quiet for a while, then no longer paid any attention to this madman. He turned to Liang Wangsun. Liang Wangsuan's face was pale, and his eyes gradually turned from dim to bright. "I have a grudge with him." This was a calm and powerful reason. Wang Pe replied, "Don't fight for a moment." Liang Wangsun replied, "Seize every moment." Wang Pe replied, "Not righteousness." Liang Wangsun replied, "Your righteousness is not my righteousness." Wang Pe replied, "Righteousness is great profit." Liang Wangsun said no more. Wang Pe turned to Xiao Zhang, looked into the eyes behind the white paper, and said, "You don't like him, so you want to kill him. I don't like you, so you want to kill him, so I won't let you kill him." Just like the question and answer between Su Li and Qin Changsheng. Many things in the world were just this simple. Wang Pe of Tianliang was truly not simple. Hello, everyone. My name is Not Simple. See you tomorrow. Chapter 395. The long street was completely silent. Several hundred people actually did not make a single sound. Qin Changsheng stood in the ruins of the inn and glanced at Hua Jifu. Previously, the Archbishop of Xuanyang City had warned him that an important figure from Scullery Manor was currently traveling in the north and was highly likely to bring about a great deal of trouble. Now it seemed that the orthodoxy truly was the strongest power on the continent. It could even accurately detect such a secret. It was just that the archbishop had miscalculated. That person was not trouble, and besides that, Su Li was also wrong. Chun Chongsheng looked at Wang Po's back and said to Su Li, "You see, in the end, there are still people willing to help you. This world is not blindly dark and worthy of trust." In the chilly drizzle, Wang Po stood like a lonely tree. He had forced back Liang Wangsun and Xiao Zhang, using incomparably forceful methods to hack at them until they were powerless to continue fighting. For this reason, he had also suffered heavy injuries. He coughed up blood, and his voice seemed rather weak. "Let's go," he said without turning around. Chun Chongxing knew that these words were meant for him. He helped Su Li up from the chair and followed Wang Po. One step at a time, they walked across the rain-soaked, broken beams and gravel, heading towards the street. Su Li felt that this was rather exhausting. Most importantly, he had to be supported by Chun Chongsheng, so he could not walk freely and at ease. Furthermore, he had to be watched by several hundred people. This would severely damage his legend. Before entering the city, I already said, "Don't let go of those 2 furry deer in a hurry," but you just wouldn't listen. He angrily complained to Chun Chongsheng, "I don't care. Hurry up and find me a mount." Chun Chongsheng felt very helpless. He thought to himself, where would he find a mount at this time? He said, "Wait until we leave the city." Su Li pointed at the red cloud Qilin that Shui he was leading on the other end of the street. "This beast isn't bad, it can fly." Chun Chongxing thought to himself, "The entire continent knows that it's not bad, but the problem is that it's not yours, nor is it mine. It's the mount of a divine general of the great Zhou that wants to kill you. If you don't hurry up and leave Xuanyang City, what's the point of doing this?" Su Li looked at the expression on his face and forced himself to say, "If it really doesn't work, the imperial carriage of the Liang household is also fine." Chun Chongsheng was silent. He thought that he was wrong. He shouldn't have walked back when they were at the Snow Ridge hot spring. While the two were talking, Wang Po was quietly waiting in front of them. He seemed very patient. Suddenly, he turned around and walked towards the crowd. He stopped in front of a cultivator and extended his right hand. That cultivator was leading a yellow horse. The sound of hoofbeats could be heard as Wang Po led the horse back and handed the reins over to Chun Chongsheng. He then turned around and continued walking towards the other end of the street while carrying the blade. Looking at his back, Chun Chongsheng was slightly startled. He didn't expect him to be such an interesting person. He looked like a shabby bookkeeper, but a wonderful bookkeeper. Wang Po is a very interesting person. When he was working as an accountant in Wenshui City, I had a very good opinion of him. But his eyebrows aren't good, too shabby, too distressed. Su Li rode on the yellow horse, his mood much better. He was in the mood to chat and reminisce about the past. He pointed at Wang Po and said, "If he was a little more handsome, I would definitely have treated him a little better back then." Wang Po should have heard these words. His steps paused for a moment. Then he continued forward, trampling through the rainwater on the street. Just at this moment, the rain falling from the sky also gradually stopped. The distant sky revealed a dark blue color. Many people had come to attend this banquet in Xuanyang City. There were painted armor Xiao Zhang, Liang Wangsun, and other people on the proclamation of liberation, as well as many other powers. At this moment, the banquet was about to come to an end, but there were still many people that were unwilling to leave. These people had a blood feud with Su Li, an old grudge that could not be resolved. Wang Po's blade could force back Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun, but it could not intimidate the hearts of people. Since these people had come to kill Su Li, they had already placed their lives on the line. They were not even afraid of death, so they naturally would not be afraid of Wang Po. The gray stones on the street had been soaked by the rain. turning into countless black inkstones. Many people stood on the sides of the street. Wang Pa held his blade in front, while Qin Changsheng held the reins in the back. The clattering was the sound of rain dripping from the eaves, the sound of blood dripping, and also the sound of the beating of hearts. The gazes of the crowd were very complex: reverence, fear, anger, and unwillingness. The expression on Wang Po's face did not change in the slightest. Qin Changsheng looked at his feet. Su Li still looked at the sky, extremely undisciplined. In the eyes of his enemies, he naturally seemed especially repulsive. Someone finally could not hold it in any longer. Rushing into the street, he yelled, "Su Li, hand over your life!" Qin Changsheng remained silent, his left hand already gripping the hilt of his sword. Su Li continued to look at the sky, not caring in the slightest. On their journey south from the snowy plains, on their return journey of tens of thousands of li, the two had already encountered far too many attacks. Now, there was one more person in the group returning south, going from 2 to 3, so they had even less to worry about. The sharp and steady saber intent pierced through the air. With a muffled sound, that person did not even have the time to sweep to the center of the street before he was sent flying back. He crashed heavily against the wall and fainted amidst the smoke and dust. Another person arrived and was once again sent flying by the metal blade. The long street of Xuanyang City was filled with flying figures, spurting blood, muffled cries of misery, and howls of pain and despair. Wang Pa raised his blade and walked at the very front. He only raised his blade and seemed to casually strike, but not a single person was able to get past his blade and approach Su Li, whether that person was an initial level star condensation expert of the north or a genius of some sect. From start to finish, he did not use the edge of his blade, so no one died. On both sides of the long street were cultivators who had fallen to the ground and found it hard to get back up. He truly was the strongest expert on the proclamation of liberation, unless a saint personally came or the storms of the 8 directions appeared, who could stop Wang Po of Tianliang. Qin Changsheng still tightly gripped the hilt of his sword, silent and vigilant. His gaze did not stop on Wang Po's body, nor did it fall on that unpredictable blade, even though he was keenly aware that this was a very rare opportunity to learn. Instead, it always fell on those places on the side of the street that were very easy to miss. Broken walls, drooping eaves, injured cultivators, and a cursing youth. He was about to leave Xuanyang City, but it was also the most dangerous moment. He had never forgotten that assassin that had always been hiding in the darkness, that assassin that had already silently followed him, and Su Li for several thousand li, that third assassin in the world with a terrifying patience, that assassin with an extremely ordinary name, Lu Qing. He felt that Lu Qing would strike. Wang Pa had already come. If Lu Qing did not take advantage of the final moments of chaos in Xuanyang City to strike, once they left Xuanyang City, it was highly likely that Lu Qing would never find another opportunity to strike. In the end, just like Su Li, he would fall into the most awkward of situations. The walls of Xuanyang City gradually approached. Once they turned the corner, they could see the tightly shut city gate. Just at this moment, Liang Wangsun said something. From the moment they had left the inn, Liang Wangsun had followed them. He was already powerless to strike, but he was not willing to leave. He wanted to see if Su Li could still survive, wanted to see if the heavens would open their eyes. He said to Wang Pa, "Although the world is vast, there is no place that Su Li can take shelter in. Where can you take him?" Wang Pa stopped. The yellow buckskin horse stopped. Wang Pa turned to him and said, "I will send him back to Mount Li. Qin Changsheng had brought Su Li for tens of thousands of li. Then he would also bring Su Li for tens of thousands of li. So what if he walked back to Mount Li? But even if you send him back to Mount Li, what meaning would there be?" An indifferent voice came from the other side of the street. Qin Changsheng thought to himself, yes, if Mount Li really did change, what could Su Li do even if he returned to Mount Li? Could it be that the world is so vast that it really can't contain him? Then he suddenly became alert and turned to the source of the voice. Who was talking? Wang Po's expression became extremely solemn and speechless. He was very vigilant, countless times more vigilant than when he was facing Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun together. Seeing that person slowly appear from the corner of the street, Qin Changsheng felt his body grow very cold. It can't be, he silently thought to himself. Suddenly, he was incomparably angry. A story should not have this sort of ending. A feast that ate people. Why should it end according to the wishes of the host? Anger originated from helplessness. At this moment, Chen Changxing felt very helpless because he had truly lost all hope. Whether it was when he faced Xue, he or Liang Hongzhuang in the wilderness, or when he saw the Liang household's imperial carriage in the inn, he had never felt despair. Even when he faced Xiao Zhang's spear and couldn't even raise his sword, he still did not feel despair, because he was still alive. Su Li was still alive. He believed that there were assuredly people in this world who would come and help them. He had shouted those 4 words to the bright and beautiful spring light of Xuanyang City, and there would definitely be an echo. As expected, Wang Pa had come. He had braved the wind and treaded the rain to come. But now, this person had actually also come. Even the brightest and most beautiful spring light would eventually dissipate. The echo that could not be forgotten would also dissipate. Even if there were still people willing to help them, what use would it be? Right now, who could help them? A middle-aged man appeared from the corner of the street. This person's long hair draped over his shoulders, but one could faintly make out many traces of snow within. It was so much so that it was impossible to tell just how many years he had lived, how many years he had cultivated. Several decades or several centuries. This person was very tall, very thin. This person had an extraordinary bearing, incomparably confident and at ease, because he was the leader of a noble clan. This person had a very cold expression, because he was the sect master of the emotion-severing sect. As he gazed at Wang Pe and Qin Changxing, he possessed a tyrannical and condescending aura. Even as he gazed at Su Li, he made no attempt to conceal his confidence and arrogance. His name shook the 8 directions, obscured by the wind and rain. The people who had come were precisely the storms of the 8 directions. Zhu Luo, he was the strongest expert of the continent. He was the god of the cultivation world. The long street of Xuanyang City was quiet, and then countless voices rose up. Several hundred cultivators, all prostrated. Liang Wangsun clasped his hands and bowed. The white paper on Xiao Zhang's face moved. Wang Pe did not move, did not bow, only calmly gazed across from him. Qin Changxing also did not bow. He had forgotten to bow. Su Li sat on his horse, looking down from above. He looked at Zhu Luo and said, "You old fellows finally couldn't hold it in any longer." Zhu Luo replied, "It's just that I can't bear to personally kill you, so I don't want to meet you." Su Li was quiet for a while, then sighed. "It seems that my view back then really was not wrong." Zhu Luo asked, "What view?" Su Li looked at him and seriously said, "You're all bastards, old bastards. Quitting smoking has really had too great of an effect on my writing. I've always been working hard, getting better and better." Chapter 396. As one of the storms of the 8 directions, Zhu Luo very rarely appeared before the eyes of the common people, but he had to come today. In truth, neither Wang Pa nor the cultivators in Xuanyang City were surprised by his appearance. What sort of person was Su Li? In order to kill him, Black Robe had not hesitated to use the Garden of Zhou as a catalyst to weave a scheme. The demons had arranged such a grand array in the wilderness in front of Xuelao City. Now, the human world also wanted to kill him. How could those assassins and experts on the level of Xue, he and Liang Hongzhuang be enough? Even if the several hundred cultivators in Xuanyang City were added, even if Wang Pa, Xiao Zhang, and Liang Wangsun, the 3 strongest experts of the middle generation, were added, it would still not be enough. Whether it was to send him off or to invite his soul, At this important moment in history that concerned Su Li's life or death, even if saints like the Divine Empress and the Pope could not appear, the storms of the 8 directions had to appear. Zhu Luo, who was like a god in the eyes of the common people, had descended from the sky to the ground, into the noisy and chaotic world of mortals. He had appeared in Xuanyang City, on the other end of the long street, precisely for this reason. He had come to kill Su Li. Thinking about the forest outside Hanqiu City, the pavilion outside the forest, and the image of that otherworldly expert with long hair draped over his shoulders, Qin Changxing felt very bad. Only after hearing Su Li's words did he understand. They were all people who lived in the world. So how could there really be an otherworldly expert who ate the wind and slept in the open, who did not eat the food of the common people? Since they were people of the world, it was inevitable that they would do some shameful things, whether they were voluntary or forced. Qin Changxing gazed at Zhu Luo's indifferent face and said nothing. He thought of the words Tang 36 had said under the banyan tree in the Orthodox Academy. No one's moral character would naturally improve as they grew older. The vast majority of the time it was a young idiot who became an old idiot. Old bastard, old idiot, these were all filthy words, but at this moment they were powerful and resonating. Qin Changxing would not say such filthy words, but as he looked at Zhu Luo across the street, he could not help but think of these words. His feeling was not wrong. The current Zhu Luo was no longer that aloof and ethereal otherworldly expert under the pavilion outside Hanqiu City, nor was he that human warrior who had beheaded the second demon general with a single strike several hundred years ago on the snowy plains under the moonlight. The current Zhu Luo was the leader of a noble clan, a member of a clan of the great Zhou, an expert of the continent, a person, an ordinary person who could kill for his own benefit. After Wang Pa bowed, he quietly stood in front of Su Li and Qin Changxing. He did not speak or move, so he naturally had no intention of stepping aside. He did not even sheath the blade in his hand. When facing the storms of the 8 directions, whose seniority, status, and strength were all far above his, the silence and motionlessness was very disrespectful. Zhu Luo looked at him and said, "I didn't want to appear, but you forced me to." This was referring to Wang Po's seemingly steady, but actually crazy strike of his blade. He had paid a grievous price in the future to heavily injure Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun, and then he had successively broken through the crowd of Xuanyang heroes. He was just about to bring Su Li out of the city. If Zhu Luo did not appear now, Wang Pa might really be able to go against the general trend of the human world and help Su Li survive. With Zhu Luo's status in the human world, these words of his were an extremely high praise for Wang Pa, even though when he said these words, there was no expression on his face. Of course, praise was not praise, and it certainly did not represent appreciation. To be more precise, Zhu Luo had used these words to clearly and even somewhat unhappily express his appreciation and disapproval of Wang Pa. After saying these words, Zhu Luo turned to Qin Changxing and yelled, "His Holiness is in the Li Palace, deeply worried. Your teachers, friends, and relatives are all worried about your safety. Millions of people are in the capital wishing you well, hoping that you will live. But in the end, you are alive. Yet you have been delayed on the road for so long. What do you want to do? Don't tell me you're not prepared to return." Compared to the tone of a senior that he had used when speaking to Wang Pa, his tone of speaking to Qin Changxing was even more impolite. Although Qin Changxing was currently the principal of the Orthodox Academy, he was still young. Moreover, from Mei Lish's perspective, he believed that he was Qin Changxing's true elder, so it was inevitable that he would be somewhat strict. His last words were almost like a lecture and a scolding. Qin Changxing did not open his mouth to speak. It was not because he had no face to face his teachers in the capital, nor was it because he was ashamed of his elders' teachings. It was because he was still very angry. He was worried that if he opened his mouth to refute, it would appear that he did not respect his elder enough. Wang Pa also did not speak because he felt that he did not need to speak. He did not need the admiration of others, even if that person was Zhu Luo. The street was quiet. No one spoke. From the moment Zhu Luo appeared, besides Su Li's undisciplined voice, the entire Xuanyang city could only hear his voice. The storms of the 8 directions were the strongest, whether it was in Xuanyang city or the entire continent. So even if his voice was very indifferent, it was still like the rumbling of spring thunder. The entire world had to carefully listen, let alone the fact that he had appeared on the streets of Xuanyang city this time, representing the collective will of the great Zhou imperial court. He, who was incomparably close to the Chen imperial clan, had clearly long since reached some sort of agreement with the Divine Empress and the Orthodoxy. The Divine Empress, the Li Palace, and Zhu Luo, these were the 3 great mountains of the great Zhou dynasty. Chen Changsheng had originally grown up in one of these mountains, a young pine. Because of his high position, he had received great respect, and his status was also very high. But now he had to contend against the will of this great mountain beneath his feet, and he also had to face the shadow of another great mountain. What could he do? He turned to Wang Po. Wang Po's tall and thin body gently swayed in the chilly wind. He really did seem very much like a sturdy and healthy pine tree. It was not so thick that it could not be struck down by lightning, but at the very least it would not easily be changed by the winds blowing in from all directions. Zhu Luo had come. He did not prostrate, did not step aside, did not retreat. He slightly lowered his head in the wind and said nothing. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. However, just these things had no meaning. He was the strongest expert of the middle generation, ranked first on the Proclamation of Liberation, but he was not Zhu Luo's match. Zhu Luo was one of the storms of the 8 directions, a person who had already stepped into the divine domain. In Xuanyang city, in the entire continent, the only person who dared to look directly at or even ignore the 5 saints and the storms of the 8 directions, besides each other, was only one person. Su Li made no attempt to conceal his contempt and ridicule. Do you old things only know how to scare children now? He was referring to the 2 sentences that Zhu Luo had separately said to Wang Po and Qin Changsheng. Without waiting for Zhu Luo's reply, Su Li's sword-like brows rose, and he spoke again. I know that all of you want me to die. From many years ago, all of you wanted me to die, whether it was the elder of heavenly secrets or you. Because when I was still very young, all of you already could not kill me, so all of you wanted to kill me even more. Based on the same principle, I think that in truth, you really want Wang Po to strike right now, so that you can find an excuse to kill him? These words were very incisive, so the street was very quiet. The crowd could only pretend that they had not heard these words. Even Wang Po himself found it inconvenient to react. Zhu Luo was expressionless and said nothing. As I get stronger and stronger, all of you want me to die more and more. Su Li sighed. Tianhai, that husband and wife by Yeshing, you 8 pieces of trash, and now even old man Yin wants me to die, the 5 saints and the storms of the 8 directions. Besides Su Li himself, the continent had 13 supreme experts. At this moment he had named 12 people. He accused these godlike existences of murdering him. I'm not unhappy, because I've never had any interest in standing together with you guys in the divine kingdom. He curled his lips and finally said, I'm just a little regretful. Back then, I should have killed you 8 pieces of trash. Not today. Chapter 397. There is no relationship between the 3 pines and the 5 pines. I haven't watched basketball in years. Because she had received a lot of care and concern, the reason why she took leave the day before yesterday and the day before yesterday was not because something happened at home. In fact, it was because she was sick. It was a minor illness, a common cold and rhinitis, but it was really uncomfortable. Asking for sick leave is often easy to be accused of faking illness, which makes me very unhappy, so I'm used to asking for personal leave now. It's just that right now, I'm still feeling very uncomfortable, sore all over, dizzy, and even my scalp hurts, so I'm writing very slowly to explain to you. as a person of virtue and prestige in the human world. One of the storms of the 8 directions that was like a god in the eyes of the common people. In Su Li's mouth, there were 8 pieces of trash. Moreover, one could not forget that at the very beginning, he had called them old bastards. That was not all. From his tone, it seemed that he could kill the strongest experts of the continent just by saying so. How arrogant and prideful! Even if he was the legendary junior martial uncle of Mount Lee, those who heard his words still felt that it was too exaggerated, even absurd. Zhu Luo's face did not reveal any ridicule due to the absurdity of the situation, nor did he show any anger. He was still as indifferent as before. As the sect master of the emotion-severing sect, his Tao heart had been cultivated to be completely emotionless. These 4 words did not have the meaning of being cruel and tyrannical. Instead, they were like the bright moon illuminating a snowy plain, aloof and desolate, unaffected by external objects and spiritual senses. He looked at Su Li and said, "You don't have a chance." Yes, Su Li was about to die. Regardless of whether or not he had the ability to kill the storms of the 8 directions at his peak, or even threaten those 5 saints, he was about to leave this world. What had never happened could only become a mystery that disappeared into the long river of history. But Su Li did not think so. He looked at Zhu Luo and said, "Once I recover, the first thing I will do is go to Hanqiu City to kill you." His words were spoken in an extremely casual and indifferent manner, as if he didn't know that Zhu Luo had come to kill him, as if he didn't know that Xuanyang City was his burial ground, as if he would return to Mount Lee in the next moment. Zhu Luo's long hair fluttered in the wind. His eyebrows moved slightly at the same time, finally revealing a trace of ridicule. "No, it shouldn't be going to Hanqiu City to kill you, but to Hanqiu City to kill your entire family." Su Li corrected him. Then he looked at Liang Wangsun at the front of the crowd and said, "This time I will learn from my past experience and not make these mistakes again." "Senior, that's not right." Chen Changsheng held the reins and looked back at him. Yes, it was wrong to kill an entire family. Even if they didn't eliminate the root of the problem, it could lead to a wildfire in the future. On their journey back south, Su Li believed that he understood Chen Changsheng, this child, very well. But only now did he realize that he did not completely understand him. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "Then we won't kill his entire family, just him." It sounded like a joke, but in fact it was a joke. Su Li, who was about to die, had said that he would kill Zhu Luo's entire family in the future. How could he still have a future? Zhu Luo looked at him and said solemnly, "When you leave this world, can't you be serious for once?" Previously, the Archbishop of Xuanyang City, Hua Jiefu, had said similar words to Chen Changsheng. Is it proper to welcome death calmly? Then I don't like this sort of proper. Between dying on the battlefield in the mountains and dying on a comfortable bed and in the embrace of a beauty, I would naturally choose the latter. Su Li said, "Speaking of which, I really don't understand just what you old guys are living for. If we're talking about benefits, I can't see how much you can gain from this matter. It seems that you're also rather miserable. After all, this is Tianliang County. Those old guys can hide in their own dwellings and capitals, but you can't hide." After a moment of silence, Zhu Luo said, "There are some matters that have to be resolved sooner or later." From start to finish, this great personage of virtue and prestige from Tianliang County had no intention of appearing in Xuanyang City, because even he was unwilling to personally kill Su Li. At the very least, his hands could not be stained with Su Li's blood. Only when Wang Pu appeared, his blade breaking through the snowy sky and the crowd retreating, did he have no choice but to appear. Su Li looked at him and jeered. "Then have you ever thought about how you'll resolve this matter in the future? Although there are many people in the South who want me to die, I'm still an idol of the South. If your hands are stained with my blood, then the anger of the Southerners will be borne by your Zhu clan and the emotion-severing sect. Have you mentally prepared yourself for this?" Zhu Luo said nothing. For a person like him, his Tao heart was immeasurable and the affairs of the world were clear. How could he not clearly calculate the current situation? However, just as he had said, since this matter had occurred in Tianliang County, he could only resolve it. After living for several hundred years, in the end, you still have to be used as a blade by others. Su Li looked at him sympathetically and said, "How did your mother give birth to an idiot like you? When your father in the underworld finds out that the Zhu clan will weaken day by day because of your decision today, will he regret giving birth to an idiot like you?" Sharp and ear-piercing, each word piercing the heart. However, it was not only because these words were profanities, but also because these words were not wrong. Words that were not wrong were swords. Given Su Li's ability, even if Zhu Luo's Dao heart was as firm as a rock, it would still leave behind a few marks. Zhu Luo looked at that fellow on the horse who was already so weak that he couldn't even raise his arm and said, "The torrential river is divided into two sides. Even if you only look and don't speak, you still have to choose a side." He was talking about Su Li, talking about why the entire continent wanted to kill Su Li. 10 some years ago, after the bloody incident in the Orthodox Academy, the Great Zhou was in the midst of internal strife. The Longevity sect and the Liang estate joined hands, intending to invade the north. However, Su Li was not willing, and even used the sword in his hand to break this major undertaking. For the past 100-some years, both the Tianhai Divine Empress and the Pope had wanted to unite the North and the South. But Su Li still would not do it. Relying on the sword in his hand, he stood in the South, forcefully stopping the momentum of the world from moving forward. In these two matters, no matter what Su Li chose, he would not fall into the current crisis. However, he chose neither. His attitude was extremely proud and clear. "If I were a pillar, I should stand in the middle of the great river. If I were duckweed, I should go with the flow. I am Su Li, so why should I stand on the shore?" Zhu Luo said no more. "Mount Li will continue to exist, but it will no longer have you." This was respect and also a declaration. The streets of Xuanyang City were silent. The dark clouds gradually thickened, and more raindrops slowly drifted down. "Is a Mount Li without me still Mount Li?" Su Li expressionlessly gazed to the south. As he thought about what might be happening at Mount Li, his heart was heavy. This was not a declaration of arrogance, but worry. The entire continent believed that Su Li was Mount Li, but he actually did not believe this. He had entered the Mount Li sword sect as a child, so he knew that Mount Li had its own sword soul and spirit. However, the truth was that in these past several hundred years, he had been that green tree on the summit of Mount Li, sprinkling down its shade to protect the disciples of Mount Li. If he was no longer there, what would happen to Mount Li? Something had definitely happened to Mount Li. What was it? Could the disciples of Mount Li hold on? This was the only thing he was concerned about. In the end, I'm still inferior to Black Robe in this aspect. Su Li retracted his gaze and looked at Zhu Luo. Although he hasn't killed as many people as I have, his understanding of the dark side of human nature is truly above mine. The divine domain is still filled with the roiling dust of the mortal world. He understands all too well the intentions of you so-called protectors of the human world. But just what are you doing? Zhu Luo replied, "Sometimes the river of history needs to be reversed in order to advance with greater strength. To resist foreign aggression, one must first pacify the internal." Su Li looked at him and mocked. "Then how about you advise those people of the Chun imperial clan not to think about becoming emperor? Or how about you advise Tianhai to abdicate?" After a moment of silence, Zhu Luo spoke of a passage from the Taoist canon, containing some hidden meaning. "What I don't like the most is the way you guys act." Su Li didn't care at all how many profound truths were contained in this passage from the Taoist canon. He said, "It's not fun at all. It truly isn't fun." Xiao Zhang, who had been silent this entire time, shook his head. The rain-soaked white paper on his face made slapping sounds, as if he was slapping someone in the face. Then he turned around, carrying the metal spear on his back, and walked towards the end of the long street. He had come to Xuanyang City to kill Su Li. If someone came to kill him now, Su Li would definitely die, so what was the point of him staying? For a person like Su Li, even if he was heavily injured and unable to fight back, killing him was still interesting, but watching him die was not fun at all. Liang Wang's son did not leave, nor did those several hundred cultivators. They stood in the increasingly heavy rain, silently watching those people on the street. They were waiting to see how Su Li would die. Su Li stroked the wet mane of the fine horse beneath him and said, "You guys can go now." These words were obviously said to Qin Changsheng and Wang Pa. Although he loathed calmly welcoming death or returning to the Sea of Stars, in the end, he still had to maintain some bearing. After all, he was the junior martial uncle of Mount Li. Su Li had thought about how a person should spend their life many times, but in the end, he still could not come to a conclusion. For the majority of the time, he still acted according to his own likes and dislikes. However, he had long since come to a conclusion about how a person's life should end. Dying at the hands of one of the storms of the 8 directions was very different from what he had imagined, but it was still barely acceptable. Chan Chongsheng held the reins and lowered his head to look at the raindrops in front of his boots, saying nothing. Now that things had gotten to this point, there was no meaning in doing anything else. It was this world that wanted to kill Su Li, and the person on the other end of the rainy street was this world's strongest expert. No matter how fast or how strong his sword was, it was impossible for him to stop his opponent. Wang Pa also said nothing, but he began to roll up his sleeve. His movements were very slow, very focused, very careful. He rolled up the sleeve on his right arm to his elbow. In this way, he should be able to wield his blade a little faster. Su Li's expression turned slightly cold. His previous heart-rending words, saying that Zhu Luo and the other storms of the 8 directions wanted to find a chance to kill a junior like Wang Pa, was precisely to protect Wang Po's life. His hands were stained with too much blood. Zhu Luo could find many excuses after the fact, but killing Wang Po was different. Without a firm enough reason, any action against Wang Po could be interpreted as jealousy of the wise and ability. Because he did not want to be replaced by a shockingly talented junior, he could disregard the overall interests of humanity and mercilessly kill Wang Pa. As long as Wang Pa did not take the initiative to attack, under the watch of several hundred gazes, Zhu Luo would be unable to do anything to Wang Pa. It was even to the extent that he and the other storms of the 8 directions would have to pay special attention to Wang Po's safety in the following period of time. But Wang Pa had no intention of giving way. He rolled up his sleeve, exposing his arm, preparing to strike. The rainy street grew quieter and quieter. Su Li calmly looked at Wang Pa. Zhu Luo calmly looked at Wang Pa. Wang Pa acted like he did not know anything. He began to use his sleeve to wipe his blade, his expression calm and focused, his movements slow and serious. Zhu Luo suddenly began to laugh, because he had finally truly become angry. One could not sense any anger from his smile, but Xuanyang City could sense it very clearly. The dark clouds in the sky pressed down even lower, and the rain instantly became torrential. This was the majesty of the divine domain, like the might of the heavens. Then he withdrew his smile and looked at Wang Po with an expressionless face. "You are prepared to attack me?" Chapter 398. Zhu Luo's words seemed calm, but they were actually extremely unyielding and tyrannical. Everyone knew that these words actually meant, "You actually dare to attack me?" Wang Po's 2 feet did not move. He rolled up his sleeves and began to wipe his blade. He was only preparing for battle, but he had not even attacked. This already made Zhu Luo extremely angry, because it had been many years since someone had dared to attack him. The storms of the 8 directions were almost like gods. Any action that attempted to attack gods was provocation, blasphemy, seeking death. Even if it was just a gesture, it could not be accepted, even if that person was Wang Pa of Tianliang. The people on the rainy street were also shocked. They did not understand why Wang Pa would do this. He had no chance. Zhu Luo's level of cultivation had long ago surpassed the secular world and entered the divine domain. Not counting the White Emperor couple, there were 12 supreme experts in the human world, and he was one of them. Wang Po was ranked at the top of the Proclamation of Liberation, the undisputed supreme expert of the middle generation. Back then, he had truly shocked the world by entering the upper level of star condensation at the age of 40. But the distance from the Saint Realm was like the distance between the sea of stars and a swamp. Many people thought that Wang Po would enter the divine domain in the future and become a new generation of storms of the 8 directions, perhaps even achieving even greater accomplishments. But that was assuredly a matter of several decades or even several centuries. In front of Zhu Luo, the current Wang Po was just a junior that could only bow his head and receive instruction. Yet he wanted to attack Zhu Luo. Junior does not dare. Wang Po raised his head and calmly, even somewhat woodenly, stared at Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's expression gradually calmed, and the mood on the rainy street somewhat relaxed. Wang Po raised his blade and pointed it at this unshakable expert of the continent through the curtain of rain. "Senior, please go first." The streets were in an uproar. Even the increasingly violent sound of the rain could not drown out the cries of alarm and discussion. Zhu Luo's brows suddenly rose, and a majestic chi soared into the sky, scattering the torrential rain. Then he once more began to laugh, a cold and distant laughter resounding through all of Xuanyang City. "What a pity," Zhu Luo indifferently said, seeming somewhat regretful. "Because of the few people in the human world that had the greatest chance of entering the divine domain, one of them would die after today without any more chances. What a pity." Su Li sighed. He did not want Wang Po to die, so he did some things for him. However, Wang Po did not accept it because Wang Po's path of the blade was different from his path of the sword. It was also different from Zhou Dufu's path of the blade back then. His blade emphasized on the word straight. When Wang Po rolled up his sleeves and wiped his blade, Su Li suddenly felt that this fellow's blade had the possibility of exploding with a radiance that was completely different from his and Zhou Dufu's, but perhaps even more interesting. Therefore, he felt that it was a pity. This world would probably feel regretful for not having the chance to see Wang Po's blade in the future. Liang Wang's son looked at Wang Po in the rain and said nothing. His emotions were somewhat complicated. In order to complete a few things, to completely experience one's life, to give up one's life and advance towards a place that could not be challenged, to geniuses like them, was not something too difficult to understand or accept. Therefore, even if he had to pay with his life, he still wanted to kill Su Li. It was just that in his spiritual world there was a vast sea of blood, so why did Wang Po do it? Was it really just based on the ideals in his heart? As soon as he thought of this, he suddenly felt a lot of admiration. He thought to himself, no wonder he had been unable to catch up to this person in the past 30 years. No wonder no matter how crazily Xiao Zhang cultivated, he could not compare to this person. No wonder Sun Mei could only imprison himself in the mausoleum of books for the past 30 years. Only when he was about to die did he rely on his transcendence of life and death to stand shoulder to shoulder with this person. Qin Changsheng was also looking at Wang Po. He didn't say anything, nor did he think too much about it. He just subconsciously sighed in admiration. He felt that Wang Po was very handsome, and for some reason he felt a sense of closeness. And then he understood. Wang Po was very similar to many of the people by his side. No, it should be that many of the people he knew were similar to Wang Po in certain aspects, such as Zhixiu, Tang 36, Gohanchi, and himself. Those similarities were often the most dazzling, such as persistence, gentleness, determination, willpower, pride, silence. Qin Changxing saw everything about himself and his friends in Wang Po. He wore an old robe, but there were countless rays of light. He saw the beauty of Chen Chujian in Wang Po, and he even saw Nank. Even though I know that I am no match for you, I still want to fight you to the death. This sort of person was truly extraordinary. Besides his senior brother Yurin, Qin Changsheng felt that he had another person to learn from in his life of cultivation. Thus he began to learn. He rolled up his sleeves, and at the same time unsheathed the dragon-cry dagger. Just at this moment, Wang Po inserted the hilt of the dagger into the opening of the sheath. With a crack, the dagger and the sheath became one, transforming into a large blade. Then his two hands slowly tightened around the hilt of the dagger, and he stared straight at Zhu Luo. Qin Changxing thought to himself that it really was a great coincidence. He inserted the hilt of the dagger into the opening of the sheath, and as a result, the dagger became a broadsword with a very long hilt. He also tightly gripped the hilt of the dagger with both hands, staring straight at Zhu Luo. Just like this, separated by a distance of over 10 zhang, one in front and one behind, they stood in the rain. Su Li sat on his horse, the rain washing his face. It was somewhat pale, but his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Zhu Luo walked over. The rain did not become heavier, but the wind became even more damp and cold, and the light became incomparably dim. Some people raised their heads to look at the sky and saw that the dark clouds in the sky had become much darker. Drinking alone under the moon did not go on blind dates. His Tao was to sever all emotions and extinguish his nature, to be incomparably pure and lonely. As his footsteps rose and fell, the fallen leaves in the rain were suddenly jolted up, carrying the droplets of water with them as they danced in the cold wind. As these wet leaves danced, there was a desolate feeling that enveloped the long street. Several groans and cries of pain came from the crowd. Those wet leaves that had been blown by the strong intent were like arrows, cutting several cultivators. Only then did the people come to their senses and understand just how frightening the following battle was. One by one, they fled to even more distant alleys. In just an instant, the long street became even quieter, empty. Empty was not the right word, because there was still the torrential rain. In the torrential rain, the true unstoppable storm of the continent was currently slowly approaching. Wang Po held his blade. Qin Changsheng led the horse, and Su Li sat on the horse, facing the storm. Standing at the very front was Wang Po. With a light clang, the metal blade rose up against the rain, held horizontally in front of him. Wang Po did not move, because he was a junior and Zhu Luo was a senior. Zhu Luo naturally would not take advantage of him. He raised his hand and lightly tapped in the heavy curtain of rain, as if he had struck out. A muffled clap of thunder resounded in front of Wang Po. The wind howled and the rain poured down, as if a waterfall had been formed there. The wet leaves continued to dance in the rain. Zhu Luo slowly walked over, his black cloak also dancing in the rain. Wang Po's face paled several degrees. His blade domain was enduring an unimaginable pressure. In the air in front of him, the rain flew chaotically. Several hundred scars constantly appeared and then disappeared. These scars were the result of Zhu Luo's qi colliding with his blade domain. Zhu Luo did not intentionally raise his qi. He only slowly walked over, treating him like a distinguished guest. The difference in strength between him and Zhu Luo was far too obvious. Zhu Luo's sword intent had not been fully released, but it had already emptied the long street. Even the soundless walls on the two sides of the street had been cut into countless deep scars by the dancing leaves in the storm. Wang Po's hand that gripped the hilt of his blade trembled, his knuckles somewhat white. The torrential rain had drenched his entire body. Countless droplets of rain dripped down, and it was unknown how much of it was sweat. In this one encounter, he knew that the golden wind could not blow away the jade dew. He was no match for Zhu Luo, but he still had no intention of turning around and leaving. He did not retreat a single step, his blade still held horizontally in front of him, like a dike or a mountain. No matter how fierce the storm was, that dike still did not collapse, that mountain still stood before him, unparalleled and unparalleled. Seeing that blade that had been washed by the rain and growing colder, sensing the unyielding will and unimaginable strength coming from the blade, Zhu Luo slightly arched his brows, feeling rather surprised. Even farther away, Shui was even more shocked, speechless. Wang Po's blade was actually stronger than anyone had imagined. His blade could actually endure the pressure of the divine domain. How had he done it? Shui, he used a blade. Now that he saw that tall and thin man on the rainy street, he finally completely understood what Su Li had meant with those words he had said to him. Wang Po only used a single blade. Only one blade, only one path of the blade. Only this way was it pure enough, strong enough. Before Wang Po, the most famous grandmaster of the blade on the continent was Zhou Dufu. Zhou Dufu also only cultivated a single path of the blade, the path of killing. He used life and death to break life and death. Wang Po could not learn Zhou Dufu's blade, so he walked his own path. He walked a straight path. Wang Po's path of the blade could be summed up in one word: straight. This straight, it was straight. He walked straight, and when he kept accounts, he wrote very straight strokes. He would never make a mistake in his calculations. When he saw and did things, he always relied on his likes and dislikes, his likes and dislikes. It seemed like even his intestines were straight. So even though he was unspeakably wretched, when his blade left its sheath, it was assuredly sharp and cold, as straight as a mountain cliff. How could even the fiercest storm destroy a cliff in such a short amount of time? Zhu Luo had already moved. Now it was Wang Po's turn. When he moved, he naturally used his blade. When he moved, he used his blade. He gripped the long hilt of his blade and slashed at Zhu Luo through the tempest and torrential rain. Without question, this was assuredly the strongest blade of Wang Po's life, because Zhu Luo was assuredly the strongest opponent he had encountered in his life. If not for Su Li, logically speaking, before he stepped into the threshold of the Saint Realm, he would have had no reason to fight with Zhu Luo, and for the benefit of humanity as a whole, Zhu Luo would also not have attacked him. In other words, this battle had occurred several decades in advance, perhaps even 100 years. The blade energy flourished, its edge piercing through all the curtains of rain and arriving in front of Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo still had no intention of using his sword. He attacked again. This time he stuck out 2 fingers. Wang Po's blade stopped in the torrential rain, unable to descend any further. Separated by Tensum Zhang, Zhu Luo's 2 fingers transformed into a storm and clamped down on Wang Po's strongest blade. It was just like how Liang Wangsun had used 2 fingers to clamp down on Qin Chongxing's sword. The difference in strength between Qin Chongxing and Liang Wangsun was as great as the difference between Wang Po and Zhu Luo, perhaps even greater. The distance between the secular world and the divine had always been insurmountable. The storm and the blade met on the long street, locked in a stalemate. The wet fallen leaves were still drifting in the air. With a sharp swishing sound, several tears appeared on Wang Po's clothes. In the end, his blade domain was not perfect, especially after he attacked with his blade. For the supreme expert of the continent like Zhu Luo, his eyes were the intellectual sword. A fallen leaf, seemingly in accord with the supreme principles of the world, avoided Wang Po's blade energy and floated down on the blade. An unimaginable amount of true essence followed this leaf and simultaneously descended. The blade fell like a large mountain. Wang Po's face was snow white, blood seeping from the corner of his lips. His blade domain had been broken. What to do? He suddenly took a step forward. Then he lowered his waist, bent his knees, and turned his wrist. He drew back his blade. The blade flew through the rain, returning with a light clang. The fallen leaf was instantly reduced to shreds. Su Li's cheers resounded through the torrential rain. Good blade! Using words to present an image is truly very difficult. I've always paid great attention to this aspect, and I personally believe that I've always done a good job. But when the real image appears, it will definitely have a different kind of beauty. Recently, the film adaptation of Choosing the Heavens will slowly begin. This will definitely be an extremely long process. The concept film I made in advance feels pretty good. In a little while, I'll send it to WeChat for everyone to see. See you tomorrow. Chapter 399. The blade that Wang Pa had chopped at Zhu Luo at the very beginning was the strongest blade he had ever used in his life. Su Li did not react at all. At this moment, Wang Pa withdrew his blade, but his cheers pierced through the torrential rain and fell into everyone's ears. Because besides Zhu Luo, he was the only expert walking in the divine domain. Only he could understand just how difficult it was for Wang Pa to sheath his blade. And this strike had cut through that wet leaf. What did this mean? This meant that Wang Pa had seen through the storm that Zhu Luo had brought with him. For an upper-level star condensation cultivator to be able to cross the threshold and see the laws of that world was just an inconceivable matter. Seeing through it was already an extremely difficult task, let alone striking it. Wang Po's comprehension of the path of the blade was truly so deep that it did not seem like he had only cultivated for a few decades. It seemed like he had already immersed himself in it for several hundred years. Su Li had seen countless cultivation geniuses in his life and had personally taught Qiu Shanjun, Qi Jian, and Chen Changsheng. But he was still stunned by the talent hidden within this strike. The blade, washed by the rain, clashed with the wet leaf in the air. Anything that was wet would become heavy. Right now, this leaf was as heavy as a mountain, but it still couldn't resist the cleaving of the metal blade. With a muffled boom, the wet leaf turned into countless fragments that flew in all directions. It was as if a rapidly expanding ball had appeared on the gloomy, rainy street. Berserk, true essence accompanied the countless leaves. The hard stone ground was pierced with countless holes, and the walls of the street that had long since been scarred by the blade were cut into piles of sand. Wang Pa held his blade horizontally in front of him, the blade domain once more spreading out. His body, as well as Chen Changsheng, who was holding the reins, and Su Li, who was on the horse, were all protected behind the metal blade. The dense and crisp sounds of collisions resounded through the street, like tens of thousands of needles simultaneously falling on the smooth metal surface, an unending chain. The wind in the torrential rain also grew even faster, blowing at everything. Several li away, in the ruins of an inn, an exquisite abacus rested in the dirty water. The beads of the abacus fluttered in the wind, giving off a crisp clatter. It truly was like a piece of music. The wind and rain gradually ceased. The street gradually grew quiet, and the beads on the abacus gradually came to a stop. Wang Pa still stood in the same place, not moving a single step. The iron blade was still in his hand, and he had no intention of putting it down. However, his complexion was already very pale, and his plain clothes were full of tears and bloodstains. The streets were quiet. Water dripped from the remaining eaves, but no one felt annoyed, because no one cared about such things. Chen Changsheng no longer had the reins in his hands. He gripped his sword with both hands and looked forward with a serious and focused gaze. Separated by Wang Po's shoulder, he looked at the undefeatable expert, who was like a god. Wang Pa had already suffered severe injuries. Zhu Luo had yet to make a move. No matter how one looked at it, Wang Pa had already been defeated. However, he had still managed to block Zhu Luo for a moment, which was already very impressive. Now, it was naturally his turn to block the attack. Zhu Luo did not notice Qin Changsheng's actions. With a slightly surprised expression, he looked at Wang Pa and said, "I didn't expect that you haven't even cultivated to the very peak of star condensation, and you're still extremely far from being half a step into the Saint Realm. Yet you're already able to pry into a few of the peripheral laws of the divine domain." Wang Pa said, "All things share the same principle. The secular world and the divine have their places of connection." Zhu Luo said, "With such talent, such comprehension, it's no wonder you dare to attack me, but what meaning is there?" Yes, in this entire affair, Wang Po's talent and unswerving determination had no meaning whatsoever. Because he could not defeat Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's sword was still in its sheath, but he was still able to make the strongest expert of the proclamation of liberation covered in blood and heavily injured. His name shook the world, obscured by the wind and rain. His strength was truly unimaginable. The difference between the two was in age, in cultivation, in that abyss that separated the divine from the secular. It was not something that talent and willpower could bridge. How could Wang Pa not be defeated? But some people did not see it this way. "You've lost," Su Li said. The crowd in the distance watched the battle. Upon hearing these words, they were filled with confusion, thinking, just how is this possible? Wang Po's entire body was covered in blood. He was clearly heavily injured. So how could he have the slightest chance of victory? Su Li sat on his horse and looked at Zhu Luo. Losing to a junior like this. Don't tell me you don't feel ashamed? The hair on Zhu Luo's shoulders slowly floated in the wind, as did his 2 eyebrows. However, just when he was about to say something, he calmed down and lowered his head to look at himself. There were no wounds there, nor were there any bloodstains. There was only a corner of his robe, slowly drifting down. An extremely small piece of his left sleeve had been cut off. Whether it was Zhu Luo or any cultivator of any level, this would not affect their battle prowess. But seeing that piece of cloth drift down into the rain in front of his feet, Zhu Luo did not say anything for a very long time. Seeing this scene, the crowd was silent. They thought to themselves, could it be that he really has lost? How did he lose? No one understood Su Li's words or Zhu Luo's silence. Chun Chongqing also did not understand, but Liang Wang's son vaguely understood. Wang Pa understood, but he did not accept it. Victory and defeat, on the surface, had exactly the same meaning. It was just that, in certain moments, in certain special circumstances, defeat did not mean that you had lost. For example, a scoundrel dressed in black and white had his head smashed into the cement, but he still picked up a piece of wood and lightly smashed the bald head of a peerless villain. This was meaningless, but he had won. Su Li naturally would not use this kind of judgment to evaluate the first exchange between Wang Pa and Zhu Luo. Wang Pa had naturally lost, indisputably as a matter of course and as a matter of course. However, he still believed that the one who had lost was Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's current reaction indicated that, on a certain level, he approved of Su Li's words. When Zhou Dufu was 3 years old, was he already able to defeat an unparalleled expert under the heavens? When the Tianhai Empress had just entered the palace, just who could she defeat? When you were Wang Po's age, could you defeat him? This was what Su Li wanted to say to Zhu Luo. It sounded rather unreasonable, but it was actually very reasonable. It was just that this reasoning could only be understood in the domain of the strongest people on the continent. Chun Chongqing understood. Somewhat at a loss, he thought to himself, if we were to compare people of the same age, then there's still Su Yurong and Lady Qin Chujian. Aren't I the strongest? Su Li did not know what Chun Chongqing was thinking, or else he would definitely have laughed at him. He continued to say to Zhu Luo, there's another problem. You've regressed too much. Zhu Luo said nothing displeased. The drizzle fell, not daring to touch the cloak on his body, avoiding and drifting away. Back then, you were able to kill the second demon general with a single sword reflecting the moon. How can the current you be a match for Heidi? The confident and unrestrained man who once wrote poems and killed people is now old and without any drive. That's fine, but you just happen to be someone who doesn't have the slightest magnanimity. You can't even compare to that woman Tianhai. For several hundred years, you didn't dare to take a single step into the capital, and now you actually want to borrow the power to kill a junior that might threaten your position. TSK, you really are quite promising. Su Li continued, why? You're old, almost 1,000 years old. You should have died long ago. To be old and not die, what is that? It's a thief, an old thief. People are just like trees. When they're at their strongest, they should do their utmost to swagger in the spring winds. When they've lived for too long, they should still struggle to live. When their bodies age and turn into rotten wood, when they're finally struck by lightning, what meaning is there in that? Zhu Luo finally opened his mouth. Looking at him, he asked, are you done? Su Li replied, "I'm done cursing." Zhu Luo said, "What you say is reasonable." Su Li's sword-like eyebrows perked up. Somewhat interested, he asked, "How so?" Zhu Luo said, "This is your second sword. Every word struck the heart, every sentence a sword." Su Li was heavily injured and unable to fight, but his sword heart still existed, so his words could still hurt. Su Li calmly looked at him, confirming that this old fellow really did have the qualifications to be absolutely arrogant. He was actually not affected in the slightest. "I received 2 of your swords, so now it's my turn to use my sword." Saying this, Zhu Luo's right hand, like a dragon breaking through the clouds, moved to his waist and gripped the hilt of his sword. The dark clouds descended once more, the rain fell once more, the sky darkening once more. Fallen leaves fell one after another, filling the sky with droplets of water. Zhu Luo unsheathed his sword. The sword was not bright, nor did it seem to have anything special about it. However, the edge of the dark clouds that enveloped Xuanyang City suddenly brightened, as if they had been plated with a layer of silver. Was that a halo of light? What was behind the clouds? Was it the sun? No, that was the moon of the demons that should not have appeared in the human world. That was Zhu Luo's past, his greatest glory. Many years ago, in the snowy plains, he saw that bright moon and recited a very beautiful poem. He killed a very powerful opponent, and thus became an expert of his generation on the continent, gaining the title of drinking alone under the moon. Finally, this expert revealed to Xuanyang City the true scene of the Saint Realm. Separated by layers upon layers of rain and countless wet leaves, Chen Chongqing could sense that majestic and dignified energy of light. He felt his body grow stiffer and stiffer, and even subconsciously wanted to avoid it. This was the Saint Realm. As it turned out, the domain here was not the star domain of the star condensation realm. A field of light enveloped everything without any distinction. So how could one attack it? He had studied the Taoist canon since he was a child, so in terms of experience and knowledge, he would not lose to anyone. However, he could not understand the light at the edge of the dark clouds or the light brought by that sword, because the operating rules of the divine domain had already surpassed his ability to understand. The pitch-black torrential rain, the bright sword, the leaden clouds that seemed about to burn. In front of this spectacular backdrop, Wang Po's figure seemed even smaller, as if he could be swallowed up at any moment. "Forget it!" Chen Chongqing yelled at him. Wang Po did not turn around. "I still want to try again. It's not easy to have this sort of experience." The torrential rain washed over his face, devoid of fear or joy. Just like his voice, it was so calm that it made one's heart palpitate and feel respect. This was true serenity, the serenity of hearing the Tao in the morning and dying in the evening without regrets. Chen Chongqing said no more, knowing that he had learned a few more things. Zhu Luo's sword arrived. The world was either light or darkness. The sword came. The dark storm brought with it light. No matter how big the world was, there was no corner that could be avoided. Not even Wang Po could avoid it. He once more struck out with his blade. Without any novelty, he swung his blade in a straight line, but where the blade energy landed, it was brimming with novelty. He did not strike at that sword glow, did not strike at the falling leaves, did not strike at Zhu Luo 10 samzhong away, but at the wind and rain. The wind and rain moved through space. Wang Po's blade descended in a straight line, cleaving apart the pillars of rain, cleaving apart the wisps of wind, cleaving apart space. With a swish, a gloomy opening appeared on the rainy street. As long as one was in this world, there was no way to avoid Zhu Luo's sword. Then let's cut open a new path and go together to a new world. Chapter 400. Wang Po's blade was very strong, strong in that it was sharp enough. With the density of his true essence at the upper level of star condensation, he was able to break through the seemingly weak but actually the toughest barrier of space. At the same time, strong in that his response was ingenious enough. Only by cutting through space could he transcend the abyss between the secular and the divine and resist Zhu Luo's moonlight-infused sword. The clouds over Xuanyang City were still gloomy and gloomy, their edges still as bright as silver. It was like night had come, and the storm that had filled the streets suddenly vanished. It became abnormally quiet, with only the faint sound of breathing. Those were the shocked sighs of the spectators in the distance. This battle had already surpassed the scope of many people's understanding, but they could feel that Zhu Luo's sword had actually been blocked by Wang Pe. How had he done it? This time, Su Li did not cheer. Instead, his expression turned serious. It was not because Wang Pe's strike was not brilliant enough, but rather because he felt that this strike was too exquisite. It was as if in the blink of an eye, in the time between the two strikes, Wang Pe had comprehended something through this battle with the strongest expert of the continent, and had actually taken another step on the path of the blade. If this was true, then Wang Pe's talent in cultivation could truly be said to be world-shaking. Moreover, this sort of opportunity could be said to be extremely rare. If he could survive this battle and completely absorb the precious experience from it, then perhaps he could break through to the peak of the star condensation realm in a very short amount of time, and even see the threshold of the Saint Realm. But would Wang Pe be able to survive? Especially after his 2 saber strikes had amply proven that he could threaten Zhu Luo's position as one of the storms of the 8 directions in a few decades? Su Li did not hold any hope for this, so his expression grew even more solemn. He felt that it was such a pity. The wind and rain rose again, and the sound of the rain falling was like a drum. Zhu Luo's sword brought endless wind and rain. After the wind and rain, there would be a rainbow. Behind the wind and rain, in the distant northern sky, there would be a bright moon. There was light and there was darkness. Most of the light and darkness were swallowed by the spatial cracks on the street, and their power was greatly reduced. This was also the reason why Wang Pe could still raise his blade in the heavy rain. But in the end, the storms of the 8 directions were not ordinary cultivating experts. They were the strongest experts of the continent, possessing an unimaginable amount of true essence, an unimaginable intelligence and combat experience, and the most dazzling brilliance. In the end, Wang Pe's blade was unable to restrain that light. It was just like how the dark clouds over Xuanyang City were incapable of obscuring the moon. In the end, the edge of the clouds was plated with a silver edge. The rainy street was dark and gloomy like the night. The spatial crack cut open by the metal blade was so dark that it made one's heart palpitate. However, at some point, the edges of those pitch-black spatial cracks had lit up. The light came from Zhu Luo's sword. The sword glows, accompanied by the howling wind and torrential rain, arrived in front of Wang Pe. At this moment, his metal blade needed to continue cleaving through the rainy street, maintaining a sufficient number of cracks in space so that Zhu Luo's moon reflection sword could not break through to his front. When it reached Chen Changshan and Su Li behind him, he had no way of paying attention to those sword glows. Those sword lights were not very bright and even appeared somewhat dim. Wang Pe's so-called perfect saber domain could not block them at all. As the sword light descended, there was a ripping sound as Wang Pe's clothes were torn to shreds. Several extremely clear sword scars appeared on his body that had undergone perfect purification, and fresh blood slowly seeped out from these sword scars. The sword light kept flashing past his iron saber and landed on his body. It seemed to be an understatement, but it was actually unforgettable. Every sword glow would cut open a wound on his body, drawing out a stream of blood. Wang Pe's face grew even paler without the slightest trace of blood. In the gloomy rainy street, it seemed especially hair-raising. His expression was still calm and resolute, but that pair of very special eyebrows drooped even more fiercely, making him seem rather dejected. He seemed even more bitter and bitter than usual. Yes, his current situation was truly very bitter. Zhu Luo's sword glows were cutting into his body, almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. How could he not be in pain? This pain was still in his mind and his heart. As a genius of the path of the blade that had long since become famous, and he was even now a great hero of the South, he had still encountered Zhu Luo in his homeland, Tianliang County, and could only bitterly and miserably endure this torment. So what if his talent and willpower were powerful? In the end, it was impossible to change the difference in strength and cultivation. It was just like what the Wang clan had encountered many years ago in Tianliang County. It was so despairing. How could it not be bitter? Only if he put away his blade, left the rainy street, and chose to avoid would he be able to escape this bitterness. However, there were many bitterness in life that could not be avoided. Wang Pa had grown accustomed to these bitter days, so he was keenly aware of this. So he had no intention of avoiding it all. His eyebrows drooped, his expression distressed, his head slightly lowered, tightly gripping his blade as he stood in the torrential rain. He allowed those sword glows that passed through his blade, intent to leave behind line after line of blood on his body, and allowed those blood to be washed clean by the increasingly heavy rain. The blade intent on the rainy street was still straight, and the cracks in space it cut open were still straight. As a result, when the torrential rain fell into them, even Zhu Luo was temporarily unable to advance. The vast majority of his sword intent could not reach this side. Wang Pa also stood very straight. But how much longer could he stand? How much longer could he hold the blade in his hand? The torrential rain was bitter and cold, and the fierce wind gradually grew stronger. The beads on the abacus in the ruins of the inn began to move again, clattering as if they were beating a rhythm. Further away on the side street, the musicians of the Liang household had long since fled. All kinds of musical instruments were strewn across the ground, blown about by the wind. The gongs smashed against the walls, causing stones to fall from the walls, the stones landing on the drums, the flutes flying into the air pouring into the holes of the flutes, whimpering. There was also a zither whose strings were breaking, clang, 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 clang. It was a very hurried and chaotic piece of music. When would the storm stop? When would the music end? No one knew. At the back of the rainy street, the crowd stood in a deathly stillness. Liang Zhen stood at the very front, his expression inexplicably calm. Liang Hongzhuang stood on the other side of the street, as if he did not want to stand together with the prince's distant cousin. For some reason, as he gazed at the distant Wang Pa in the storm, his expression was rather strange. It seemed like he wanted to cry, but also seemed like he wanted to laugh. In short, it was very complicated. No one knew what would happen next, and no one could even imagine what would happen next. Dark clouds obscured the sky, making the day seem like night. The ordinary people of Xuanyang City had their doors and windows tightly shut, either hiding under their beds or in their jars. None of them dared to come out. The people still on the street were all cultivators, and these cultivators had all come to kill Suli. In normal times, when experts like Zhu Luo and Wang were fighting, they would absolutely not dare to make any strange movements. If they angered their opponents, who knew what sort of price they and the sects behind them would have to pay. But today, many people did not care about these things. When they stepped into Xuanyang City, they were already prepared to pay with their lives. Liang Wang's son, Liang Hongzhuang, and Xue, he did not think much, but those people did. At this moment, Su Li was riding on the back of that buckskin horse. In the storm, he was extremely striking. Everyone knew that he was already a cripple. Moreover, Lin Songhai had succeeded in forcing him to use his final attack. And Chen Chongqing had also paid a great price to block Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsuan's attacks, so he was probably very tired. As for Wang Pa, he was currently being suppressed by Zhu Luo's sword to the point where it was difficult for him to move. Then, if they attacked Su Li now, who could save him? Who could still block Su Li's spear? Many people thought so, and so they began to do so. Under the cover of the wind and rain, they walked out of the alley and walked toward the man on horseback on the rainy street. Liang Zhen and Liang Hongzhuang looked at those people walking past them, feeling the chill and killing intent from their bodies. They said nothing, did not stop them, nor did they make a sound. The buckskin horses' reins hung in the rain. Perhaps it was because of the breed of the horse, or perhaps it was because of Su Li, but the phenomenon brought about by Zhu Luo's sword and the terrifying ripples of battle, qi, 10 zhang away did not frighten this steed. Instead, it obediently lowered its head. Chen Changxing also lowered his head, silently gazing at the ripples in the rain. The dragon cry dagger and the sheath had finally connected, and this was the first time since leaving Xining Village's old temple. Back in Xining Village, Senior Yurin had only chosen this method of combining swords when he went to the back of the mountain to hunt those powerful monsters. Today, he did this because he knew that the enemy he faced today was far too powerful, and also because he wanted to learn from Wang Pa. Suddenly, he raised his head and then turned around. Those cultivators had not expected that he had always been watching behind them. Qin Changsheng and these cultivators stared at each other in silence. Not far away, the berserk and divine sword intent was already growing stronger and stronger. Qin Changxing did not pay attention to that side. Over there was Wang Pa. Right now, he only needed to pay attention to this side. He had already thought through everything, so he was very calm. His eyes were very calm. No matter how fiercely the rain falling on his face it was unable to disturb him. A cultivator gave a roar, and his body suddenly split into three. Attacking Su Li, Qin Changxing gripped his dagger with both hands and slashed down at the rainy sky. The place where the sword fell was several zhang away. It was only one sword, but it simultaneously slashed at 3 figures in the rainy sky. 3 people. This was not the intellectual sword, nor was it the blazing sword. This was a move of the Mount Li sword style, the 3 strokes of the plum blossom. 3 days ago, Su Li had inadvertently told him about it. Swish! It was closely followed by another. It seemed like 3 clangs of swords resounded in the rain at the same time. Those 3 figures simultaneously froze in the rainy sky. Then the 2 figures vanished. That cultivator gave a muffled grunt, clutched his chest, and collapsed onto the rainy street. In his hand, the dragon cry dagger seemed to come to life. In just a few exchanges, those cultivators that had prepared to ambush Su Li had all collapsed. Just at this moment, he saw out of the corner of his eye that Wang Pa also seemed about to collapse. In an instant, he made a decision. Zhu Luo attacks. Qin Changxing attacks. The spectators attack. Next, who will attack? Chapter 401. Qin Changxing decided that he could not wait for Wang Pa to be defeated before acting. Standing on the rainy street, the 2 walls seemed rather solemn and stirring, but in reality it was meaningless. The reason he had thought this way before was because he had no confidence in himself at the time. He had only wanted to do his best and leave the rest to fate, no matter how astonishing his talent was. He had only cultivated for a little more than a year. Not to mention the broken meridians in his body, it was truly an absurd and laughable thing to want to fight against the storms of the 8 directions in such a short amount of time. He originally thought that even if he were to use his sword later, it would only be to show his sincerity. But now he changed his mind, because with each cultivator that fell, his confidence increased by a fraction. Ethereal opening cultivators were no longer able to threaten him. Just a moment ago, there had even been a cultivator who should have entered the initial level of star condensation not too long ago. But he had actually cut down a cultivator in the rain with a single strike of his sword. If it wasn't for the level of the battle at the other end of the street being too high, too dazzling, perhaps more people would have noticed Qin Changsheng's inconceivable feat, the advancement he had obtained in the mausoleum of books, the harvests he had gained in the garden of Zhou, the sword he had learned along the way back to the south with Su Li, and the image of Wang Pa in the torrential rain. All of these were perfectly displayed in this one attack. Looking at Wang Pa, who was bitterly enduring in the storm, looking at the blood that was constantly flowing from his body, which was quickly being diluted by the torrential rain, Qin Changsheng's gradually strengthened confidence and gradually recovering true essence caused an intense desire to well up within his heart. He wanted to try and see if he could stab Zhu Luo with his sword. Even if his opponent was one of the legendary storms of 8 directions, he still wanted to stab with his sword. To be honest, he didn't know how he should attack or where he should stab. However, he thought that since he had decided to attack, then he would naturally know how to execute it. Chen Changsheng walked past those cultivators lying in the rain, leaving Su Li's horse and walking towards Wangpa. As he walked, he began to calm his heart and clear his mind, his eyes growing brighter and brighter. His opponent was Zhu Luo, a nascent saint who could easily suppress his blazing sword. Before the moonlight, how could a firefly possibly shine? The moonlight-like sword intent on the rainy street drifted erratically, impossible to calculate, so the intellectual sword naturally couldn't be used. Then what sword should he use? What kind of sword was his strongest sword? Qin Changxing knew what his strongest sword was. On the mausoleum of Zhou, he had once thrust his sword the shadow that obscured half the sky. He didn't know if he could still use that sword, but he wanted to try. His divine sense landed on the Dragoncry sword. At this moment, the Dragoncry sword used its scabbard as its hilt and became one. The moment his divine sense descended, it awakened the souls within the sword. He awakened the 10,000 broken swords and prepared to borrow the sword intent again. The black dragon woke up as well. He took a deep breath. His true essence violently combusted, and his body became incomparably hot. The rainwater that constantly fell upon his clothes instantly turned into steam, covering his upper body. His broken meridians let out an unbearable sound, and an intense pain spread from every part of his body to his sea of consciousness. The raging Jinyuan finally succeeded in breaking through several blockages and moved to his wrist. He was ready to draw his sword. The countless sword wills in the sword and the wisp of black dragon's soul also silently prepared themselves. However, at this moment, Chen Changsheng suddenly felt that the surrounding rainy street had become a little darker. Was it because of the mist in front of him? It was not because of the fog, but because someone had blocked the light from the street. Chen Changsheng suddenly felt very cold. His body had long since been drenched by the cold rain. Logically speaking, he should have become numb, but at this moment he seemed to clearly feel a strand of cold wind brush past his neck. A chill arose from the bottom of his heart. His body stiffened, and he found it impossible to move. Only now did he remember that he had forgotten something. That was the most important thing. To be more precise, he had forgotten a person that could not be forgotten. He carried Su Li across tens of thousands of li of snowy plains, returning from the land of demons to the human world. An assassin had been following them the entire time. This assassin was very famous. So Su Li somewhat looked down on him. Of course, only Su Li had the right to look down on this assassin. It must be known that this assassin was ranked 3rd on the ranking of assassins of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. No one had ever dared to look down on him, and the vast majority of those who did were probably already dead. Chen Changxing knew that he absolutely did not have the right to look down on this assassin. Moreover, on the entire journey, Su Li would often stare silently at the distant mountains. From those scenes, he knew that even Su Li felt some fear towards this assassin in the depths of his heart. Su Li and he had always been very vigilant, whether it was with Xue He or with Liang Hongzhuang. Even when they were forced into desperate straits, even when it seemed like they could die at any moment, they still did not forget the existence of this assassin and prepared a backup plan. Only just now did Qin Changxing finally forget about this matter. Just when he was the most confident, felt that he was at his strongest, when his will to fight was at its most resolute, he walked towards Zhu Luo, but he left Su Li. He did not know that the assassin was between him and Su Li, soaked in the rain and lying on the ground. It was the cultivator that he had faked being knocked down, and the assassin was currently standing up. After several dozen days and nights of hiding and waiting, the assassin had finally found the perfect opportunity. The assassin did not wear a mask. He had an ordinary appearance, and his brows and eyes could be seen everywhere. When the rain fell on his face, it did not leave a single mark. It was also very difficult for his appearance to leave a mark on a person's heart. This was a very ordinary and unremarkable person, just like a rock on the side of the road, a tile in a ruin. Chen Changsheng felt the activity behind him, and his body became incomparably stiff. He wanted to turn around, but he knew it was too late. It truly was too late. That assassin would not give him any more chances, would not give Su Li any chances. The assassin floated in the rain in front of the horse. His movement technique seemed very ordinary, but it was very fast. Then he struck. His sword was very ordinary, and his sword technique also seemed very ordinary, but it was very fast. In short, everything happened very quickly. But this assassin's cultivation was very abnormal. The tip of that ordinary sword noiselessly glittered with countless fragments of stars. An extremely powerful and also extremely secluded qi accompanied the sword. The upper level of star condensation. An upper-level star condensation assassin? This had already surpassed the scope of many people's understanding. He had already cultivated to the upper level of star condensation. So why did he still need to kill people for a living? Why did this assassin want to kill Su Li? Just how frightening was this assassin? The rain continued to fall. Chen Changsheng gripped his sword with both hands and stood on the rainy street. Behind him, the assassin was like a ghost, striking at Su Li with his sword. Everything had happened too quickly. It seemed like it was already too late to change anything. The sound of the rain was furious. Suddenly, a rather soft sound rang out. It was the sound of a sword meeting blood. Recently, my health has not been good, and I have been especially busy. I have very few updates. Please forgive me, everyone. I will strive to write more after the 22nd. But I have been writing very diligently. I hope everyone will like it. Chapter 402. The assassin was behind Chen Changsheng. He had used the simplest and even somewhat stupid method to make all of Chen Changsheng's vigilance and defenses fall to nothing. Now he had already rushed in front of Su Li, only a distance of 1 zhang, to an upper-level star condensation assassin. This distance did not exist. Besides experts of the divine domain, only a few people like Jin Yulu and Nank could rely on their innate speed to be faster than him. The assassins and Su Li's gazes met in the torrential rain. It was already an unchangeable situation of certain death, so their gazes were very calm. However, this calmness concealed an extremely complex emotion. The assassin looked at Su Li. In the depths of his emotionless eyes, one could faintly see a trace of pain that was difficult to erase and a hatred that had been accumulated for countless years. As for Su Li, he looked at the assassin that had broken through the rain. The emotions between his brows were very undisciplined, as if he did not care about this person's life at all. Yet why did he seem so solemn? The yellow paper umbrella was in Su Li's left hand, soaked in the rain. His right hand was still some distance from the handle of the umbrella. Did he still have the strength to fight? In the next moment, would he do what he did in the snowy plains or in the inn, and grab the handle of the umbrella? After following them silently for several dozen days and nights, no matter how desperate Chen Changsheng and Su Li had been when facing Shui, he and Liang Hongzhuang, the assassin had never acted. Even when Liang Wang's son and Xiao Zhang had arrived in the inn, he still did not take the opportunity to act. It had to be said that this assassin ranked third in the world truly possessed an unimaginable cautiousness and acuity. At that time he believed that the situation could still change, so he had never moved. Only now, when Wangpa had appeared, Zhu Luo had struck, and Chen Changsheng had walked hot-bloodedly to the other end of the street. When all the changes had come to an end, did he choose to strike? When all the changes had come to an end, his appearance was the only change. At the end of the road, when the water flows, the stone will be revealed. When the sun sets, there is naturally no turning back. It was just like how Chen Changsheng had left Su Li. Even if it was only 10 odd steps, it was already too late to turn back. much less turn around to save him. Qin Changxing's body was very cold. He was not Jianlu, nor was he Nank. Although he knew the Yesher step, it was still impossible for him to return to Su Li's side in such a short amount of time. The fastest thing in the world was not the red eagle, not the red goose, not Jianlu, not Nank, not that assassin, but thought. As he thought these things with despair, his body began to move. He didn't even realize he had moved. What he used was the Yesher step. He did not turn around, nor did he calculate the position of the stars. He completely relied on his knowledge of the several thousand positions of the Yesher step to recall Su Li's position, and then he disappeared into the rainy sky. He knew that it would be difficult for him to get back before the assassin, but he wanted to try. Perhaps it was because the entire world felt that Su Li should not have died at this time, or perhaps it was because the entire world was moved by his intense remorse and desire to make up for it. Or perhaps it was because his increase in cultivation made the Yesher step even faster. Or perhaps it was because the assassin's movement technique and sword were not as fast as people imagined. Or perhaps it was because he had attached a strand of sword intent to the Yesher step. A soft sound rang out. In the rainy street, uft. That was the sound of the sword coming into contact with blood. That was the sound of the water sack bursting. Qin Changxing appeared in the rainy sky in front of Su Li. He had actually used the Yesher step to get ahead of that assassin. He lowered his head to look at his abdomen. The assassin's sword had pierced into his abdomen, and blood slowly flowed out. The assassin looked at Qin Changxing, a slightly perplexed expression appearing in his originally indifferent eyes. He could not understand how his sword had pierced into Qin Changxing's body. Qin Changxing also had many things that he could not understand. For example, an upper-level star condensation assassin was actually so formidable, actually able to easily pierce through his body. Although the stab was not too deep, it really was still painful. He looked at his abdomen that was slowly leaking blood, somewhat perplexed and also somewhat gratified. Why was it that the blood that flowed now had no taste? The assassin could not understand how Qin Changxing could return so quickly. There was a remnant sword intent that lingered in the rain. The assassin sensed it, and then he knew that it was the final move of the Mount Li sword style. The final move of the Mount Li sword style, mutual destruction, risking one's life and forgetting one's own. It was a sword that did not care about one's life. To not even care about one's life, it was naturally very ruthless. Because it was very ruthless, it was very fast. From the battle in the grand examination to the snowy plains, and then to cultivating the blazing sword, Qin Changxing was very familiar with this sword. In the world, there was no one more familiar with this sword than him. In his moment of despair, he had no time to strike, only enough time to strike. This strike did not need the sword, only its heroism. Fortunately, or perhaps unluckily, he won his gamble. He used the final move of the Mount Li sword style to return to Su Li. He used his own body to block this assassin's incomparably sinister and powerful strike. Blood slowly flowed out and was then washed away by the rain. The rainy street was quiet. Seeing this sight, the crowd was shocked speechless. No one had expected that Qin Changxing would actually risk his life to protect Su Li, and no one had expected that he would be heavily injured because of this. Everyone in Xuanyang City had come to kill Su Li, but no one wanted to kill Qin Changxing. He was the principal of the Orthodox Academy. He was the Pope's nephew. This was just an accident. An accident, right? It truly was an accident. Whether it was Zhu Luo on the other side of the street, Su Li on his horse, or even the assassin in front of him, they were all very surprised. Then what to do next? Soon after, there was another light sound in the rainy street. Blood spurted out, and the sword left Qin Changxing's body. The assassin once more attacked Su Li. He was very calm, even somewhat wooden. Qin Changxing stepped onto the star position, broke through the curtain of rain, and used his sword to get up. He once more appeared in front of the assassin's sword. With a squelch, the edge of the sword once more sank into his abdomen, bringing with it fresh blood. His face was pale, but there were 2 smears of red. This was the color brought about by pain and blood loss, and also the heroism of stubbornness and willpower mixed together. The assassin slightly lowered his head and calmly looked at him. He said nothing, but the meaning in his eyes was very clear. You will die. Chen Chongqing was heavily injured and unable to speak. As the rain flowed past his face, the meaning was also very clear. So what? Some people chose to die in order to save others, like Chen Chongqing. Some people chose to die in order to kill others, like Liang Xiaoxiao. From the snowy plains of the land of demons to Tianliang County, tens of thousands of li to the south, Qin Chongsheng and Su Li encountered many things and were concerned about certain places. The place that Chen Chongsheng was most concerned about was the capital, while the place that Su Li was most concerned about was Mount Li. Mount Li was also very concerned about Su Li, but at that time, Mount Li was facing many troublesome problems. Qiu Shanjun was still unconscious from his heavy injuries, and Qi Jian, who had just been transported back to Mount Li, was also unconscious. Afterwards, many people came from Mount Li. Many people in the capital were worried about Chen Chongsheng. Luo Luo stood on the roof of the Hall of Pure Virtue, gazing at the setting sun every day. Her elegant and small face was filled with worry and sorrow. The Orthodox Academy was as quiet as a grave. Every day, Xian Yuanpo would go to the Mausoleum of Books to see if Tang 36 had come out. The great banyan tree by the lake was a pressing green in the spring, yet no one came to investigate. The matter in the garden of Zhou had already come to an end, but the aftermath was far from settling. People left Hanqiu City and spread the matter in the Garden of Zhou, as well as the shocking news outside the Garden of Zhou, to the entire continent. The demons had used some unknown method to sneak into the Garden of Zhou and then forcefully closed it, stirring up countless rains of blood and foul winds. Afterwards, the Garden of Zhou suddenly collapsed for some reason and should have been destroyed by now. Many talented young cultivators had fallen within, but the most shocking thing was that Qin Chongsheng had disappeared from the Garden of Zhou, his fate unknown. The current Qin Chongsheng was no longer that young Taoist from Xining Village's old temple. He was first place of the first banner in last year's grand examination. In the Mausoleum of Books, he had attracted a sky full of starlight and helped several dozen cultivators of the same age break through. He was also the young genius that the Pope valued the most, the youngest principal of the Orthodox Academy in history. The fate of such a person was unknown and his whereabouts unknown. Of course, it would attract the shocked gazes of the entire continent. The only thing that could compare to this matter was the accusation that Liang Xiaoxiao had made before his death. Before his death, Liang Xiaoxiao did not explain, but everyone present knew that what he wanted to say was Qun Chongsheng, Qi Jian, and Zhixiu were colluding with the demons. If it were anyone else making this accusation, they would only invite ridicule. But Liang Xiaoxiao was a disciple of Mount Li, one of the illustrious divine state's 7 laws. He had no reason to frame his junior brother, Qi Jian. Most importantly, Liang Xiaoxiao was dead. He had died under the final move of the Mount Li sword style, and the dead could not lie. The dead can't even speak, so they naturally can't lie. The problem is, when that Mount Li disciple said those words, he was still not dead. So what makes you think that he wouldn't lie? But Liang Xiaoxiao was already heavily injured at the time and not far from death. Those words were equivalent to his last words. Zhou Tong was expressionless. His 2 eyebrows, under the illumination of the oil lamp, were like 2 lines of ink. He said, just because his last words are reliable, then it will be much easier for my department for purging officials to handle cases in the future. If there's any lord that feels that I don't have enough evidence, I can arrange for one of their nephews to commit suicide and leave behind a few words before he dies. I never knew that Lord Zhou Tong cared so much about evidence, Mou said to him. She had never liked Zhou Tong, and the entire capital knew of this matter. Of course, this did not affect her and Zhou Tong's cooperation in the court. As the divine empress's 2 most reliable arms in the imperial court, they had to cooperate well. The important point is that no one believes that Chen Changxing is colluding with the demons, so I need evidence. Zhou Tong's expression did not change as he calmly said, "In reality, if that Mount Li disciple had not died, do you think that the Li Palace would have agreed to hand Zhixiu over to me just based on Zhuang Huanyu's accusation?" After a moment of silence, Mou asked, "What was the result of the interrogation?" He did not say a single word, so there is naturally no result. Zhou Tong expressionlessly said, "I will interrogate him for a month. At that time, if he still does not admit that he and Qin Changsheng are colluding with the demons, then I will admit that what he said was the truth." Hearing this, Mou felt a chill and her face paled. Zhixiu had already been imprisoned for many days. If he were to be imprisoned for another month, would he still be able to come out alive? It must be known that the prison he was in was not the imperial court prison, nor was it the prison of the Ministry of Justice. It was the most sinister and terrifying Zhou prison of legends. No one could last so long in Zhou prison. Even if they could, it was still too cruel. Cruel to the point that even Zhou Tong felt some sympathy for that wolf youth. It's written quite well. I hope that there will be an update tomorrow. If not, I will let everyone know in advance. Chapter 403. Mou asked, "Why do you need Wofu Zhixiu to speak?" Zhou Tong replied, "Because no one believes that Chen Changsheng is colluding with the demons. The death of that Mount Li disciple can only make people doubt this, but it is not enough to shake their faith, unless Zhixiu admits that they did something." As the youngest principal of the Orthodox Academy in history, many people believed that Chen Changsheng was highly likely to become the next master of the Li Palace, the next pope. There was no brighter future in this world. The demons simply could not offer better conditions, so he naturally had no reason to betray humanity and collude with the demons to do those things. Mou was quiet for a while, then asked, "Do you believe it?" No matter how the entire continent evaluated Zhou Tong, no matter how cruel and terrifying Zhou Tong's methods were, everyone admitted that when it came to investigating cases, Zhou Tong was unparalleled. Whether I believe it or not has never been the most important thing. Evidence is the most important thing. Zhou Tong continued, "So I gave that wolf youth another month of time. In truth, that month of time was also given to me." Mou looked into his calm and tranquil eyes and asked, "Even if the military has a lot of objections to this?" The corner of Zhou Tong's mouth twitched as he smiled. "You think I care about these things?" Mou mocked. "I've always wondered, besides the Empress, just what else do you care about?" Zhou Tong did not respond to these rather disrespectful words. Instead, he said, "In truth, I still care about a few very interesting people and matters, like that dead Mount Li disciple. If I weren't sure that he was really dead, I would very much like to have him be my successor." Mou's expression changed. "Why?" "I've rarely seen someone so ruthless to themselves. If they can be so ruthless to themselves, then presumably they have no love for this world. And this is the prerequisite for becoming my successor." Zhou Tong obviously did not have any love for this world, and he did not even have the slightest bit of kindness. Moreover, Liang Xiaoxiao's judgment of the general situation and his calculations of the situation were extremely accurate. He clearly understood that even his own death was not enough to drag Chen Changxing and Zhixiu into the abyss. So in that performance outside the Garden of Zhou before his death, he very clearly divided Mount Li and the capital into two lines. Framing Qin Changsheng and Zhixiu was just something he did in passing. His true target was Mount Li. It was Su Li, and of course, there was also that girl called Qi Jian. Upon hearing these words, Mou suddenly felt her body grow somewhat cold. It turned out that Zhou Tong knew everything, understood everything very clearly. He knew that Qi Jian was Su Li's daughter, knew of the hatred in Liang Xiaoxiao's heart, knew that all of this was a scheme. "So you knew everything." She stared into Zhou Tong's eyes. Zhou Tong ignored him and continued. Many people need Qin Changsheng to collude with the demons, but Liang Xiaoxiao used the final move of the Mount Li sword style to kill himself. This is truly extraordinary. Mo said, then what do you think? Didn't you say that the most important thing is evidence? Zhou Tong fell silent for a while, then suddenly said, Qin Changsheng's teacher is Taoist Ji, and no one knows what relationship Taoist Ji has with Black Robe. So why can't Qin Changsheng collude with the demons? Moreover, Qin Changsheng is still alive, since the Garden of Zhou has already been destroyed and so many people at the main gate have not seen him. How did he leave the Garden of Zhou? Other doors? Don't forget, only Black Robe knows where the other doors of the Garden of Zhou are. Mou fell silent for a very long time, then said, So it turns out that you really do suspect him. Zhou Tong stood up and walked to the door of the main hall. Gazing at the many stars in the night sky, he said, The accusation that Liang Xiaoxiao used his death to send out is very powerful. It just so happens that there are many people in the capital who need Qin Changsheng to collude with the demons. It just so happens that Qin Changsheng was able to leave the Garden of Zhou, which means that he might be colluding with the demons. Then I naturally want to know whether or not he is colluding with the demons. Mou walked up behind him and said with a hint of warning, His Holiness will trust him. Zhou Tong's expression suddenly became rather strange. He said, If His Holiness still insists on trusting him in this sort of situation, then doesn't that mean that His Holiness is no longer worthy of trust? Mou suddenly felt that the sinister qi that had seeped out from the courtyard in front of her had arrived here. The air around her had become abnormally cold. She did not know what else to say in this sort of situation. You should first clearly understand just what the Empress is thinking. Then, what are your thoughts? Zhou Tong held his hands behind his back and gazed at the night sky. His voice was as light as the air after a rain, and his thin body seemed rather bleak in the darkness. He really did seem like a sorrowful poet. Me? Thoughts about what? Thoughts about Qin Changsheng. Do you want to die? Mou angrily yelled. Zhou Tong's expression did not change in the slightest. He indifferently said, That day, when the news that Qin Changsheng was still alive was sent to the capital, I heard that the flowers in the orange garden bloomed overnight. It seems that your mood is quite good. The anger in Mou's eyes transformed into killing intent. Zhou Tong did not turn around, as if he did not notice her gaze. Mou left, and Zhou Tong began to stroll. The entire capital and even the entire continent knew that Zhou Tong did not have any hobbies other than walking and personally executing punishments. He treated others strictly, and he was even more strict with himself. He never indulged in sensual pleasures, and he certainly did not indulge in debauchery, even when he was still a young man. He lived an extremely disciplined and strict life, and it could also be described as dry and monotonous. Of course, he also wrote poems of grief and worry for the country. He also wrote memorials to the throne, and he wrote mature strategies for the country. He lived like a great scholar, and in front of the divine empress, he was definitely not a slanderous minister, but a frank minister. Moreover, he was the most honest official in the history of the great Zhou dynasty because he never lacked money and also because no one dared to bribe him. In the Garden of Zhou, he raised 15 black Cerberuses. These powerful monsters could only be found in the depths of the demon domain. They possessed a deformed and terrifying appearance, as well as an extremely powerful scouting and battle ability. The black saliva that flowed from them could even corrode the hardest metal. It was probably for this reason that Lord Zhou Tong was not corrupted by money. Bribers could not approach his residence, and those that attempted to sneak into the Garden of Zhou to bribe him would become food for these black Cerberuses. In the grass and forest surrounding his residence, who knew how many human bones there were? Deep in the night, 10-odd Cerberuses stood in the darkness. Their black and glossy skin was illuminated by the starlight, giving off a strange feeling. Under the claws and teeth of these black demon dogs was a dungeon. Zheshio was imprisoned in this dungeon. 55 extremely thin metal chains passed through his body. His naked skin was covered in blood, dried or fresh blood, and in many places, one could even see the eerie white bones. After some time, he woke up. He felt the qi coming from outside the ventilation hole, and with some difficulty, he raised his head and looked in that direction, breathing rapidly several times. From there, he could see a little bit of the night sky with a few stars. He opened his eyes and looked there, seeming somewhat greedy. But in reality, he could not see anything at all. In the depths of his eyes, there was a lemon color. This was the color of the peacock plumes, poison mixed with blood. It was somewhat sour. After a busy day, I actually didn't stop updating. I really am amazing. Chapter 404. Liang Xiaoxiao was dead, so the accusation he had made before his death was naturally extremely powerful. It was just that the other witness to the incident in the garden of Zhou, Zhuang Huanyu, besides giving an extremely brief explanation of the situation, had maintained his silence for the vast majority of the time. As a result, there were many details in the deceased's story that had not been filled in. Coupled with the fact that the person Liang Xiaoxiao was testifying against was not an ordinary person, the incident in the Garden of Zhou was very naturally dragged into a quagmire. Even after several dozen days, there was still no progress. Qin Chongqing's identity was extremely special. The important figures of the Li Palace were assuredly keeping an eye on this matter. In the grand examination, people had already discovered that Zheshio had a rather good relationship with the Orthodox Academy. Moreover, this wolf youth had achieved countless military merits in the snowy plains of the north, deeply receiving the appreciation of a few divine generals of the great Zhou army. As for how this matter would develop, many people believed that it would ultimately depend on the divine empress's decision. As a result, the Garden of Zhou became the focus of unparalleled gazes. This was because this was Zhou Tong's mansion. The divine empresses had always been manifested through this craziest and cruelest mad dog. It was also because after the imperial court had taken Zheshio away from the Li Palace, he had been imprisoned here. Very few people knew that the legendary Zhou prison, the great prison that caused countless ministers and generals to tremble in fear at the mention of its name, had originally been in the same building as Zhou Tong's mansion. The two were separated by only Tensum Zhang and two flimsy doors. The phrase, beautiful scenery on a beautiful day, but the heavens referred to Zhou Tong's mansion and Zhou Tong's prison. The former had the beautiful scenery of the four seasons, while the latter was the heavens that could not be helped and the blue sky could not be seen. The black rhinoceros dragged the heavy carriage through the stone arch of the Garden of Zhou, arriving at the sinister building in front of it. Although it was so close, Zhou Tong still habitually rode in the carriage, other than in front of the divine empress. Only in this carriage did he feel safe. The black rhinoceros carriage arrived in front of the prison's tunnel. With a creak, the carriage door slowly opened. Zhou Tong slowly walked out of the carriage. He subconsciously gazed at the night sky, his face somewhat pale under the starlight. The moment he stepped off the carriage, the security around Zhou prison was instantly raised by several levels. As for the shadows of the nearby eaves, who knew how many cultivators were hiding? Zhou Tong was not a weakling. He was a star condensation expert, one of the few experts of the great Zhou dynasty. But even so, he still lived very cautiously and cautiously. Besides the need to investigate a case, he rarely left Zhou prison. Even if he did leave, the vast majority of the time he would go to the imperial palace. Moreover, every time he went out, he would bring countless guards with him. He knew very well that there were countless people who wanted to kill him. If there was a ranking of the people on the continent that most people wanted to kill, Su Li would definitely be ranked behind him. He arrived at the dark and cold prison cell. Zhou Tong's expression did not change in the slightest as he looked at the badly mutilated wolf tribe youth. He did not show any of the abnormal excitement that was rumored to have. There was only calmness. Ever since the Divine Empress had ordered him to take over the department for purging officials, Zhou Tong had interrogated countless prisoners, personally used countless punishments, and seen countless wretched situations. There were many people even more wretched than Zheshio, so it was impossible for him to be moved by this. But he did not believe this to be numbness, nor would he allow himself to become numb because of this bloody scene. He firmly believed that only by maintaining his original intentions towards his work could he continue to maintain his interest and liveliness, and only then could he maintain his keen senses towards many things. Yes, Zhou Tong had always believed that this was just a job. He had originally studied the books of the sages, but he had not done well in policy theory, so he switched to cultivation. He had done quite well in cultivation, but because he was too old, he did not have the opportunity to enter the inner sect of those sects to study. As a result, he began to build his network, finally meeting the Divine Empress in the 100 Herb Garden and taking up this job. When doing a job, one had to love it, and one had to earnestly do it to the best of one's ability. Whether it was reading the books of the sages, cultivating the Tao, or now torturing the people of the world, Zhou Tong had always demanded this of himself, and the facts proved that he had truly succeeded. At 6:15, you fainted from the pain. Based on the time, you should have woken up from the pain, so I will ask you again. If those two women were the two wings of demon Princess Nank, why did they not work together with that demon general couple and directly kill you? Instead, they worked separately, giving you the chance to separately defeat them? Zhou Tong did not stand in front of Zheshio and stare into his eyes to pressure him, nor did he look at the file on the table. He stood at the only vent in the dungeon, calmly gazing at the stars in the night sky, seeming rather absent-minded. The file on the table was the statement that Zheshio had made to Mei Lisha on the road, and after Zheshio had come to Zhou prison, he had not said a single word. Zhou Tong was keenly aware that mental pressure was of no use to this wolf youth. Zhou Tong had read through the file once and remembered all its contents, including those inconspicuous details. He felt that it was just like Liang Xiaoxiao's last words. Zheshio's statement also had many questionable points, but he still asked absent-mindedly because he knew that he did not need to put too much effort into it. Zheshio would still not admit anything. His question was only a part of his job, a procedure, or perhaps a process. The laws of Zhou stipulated that he had to do something. It was all work. Only by ending this part could he proceed to the next part. Hearing Zhou Tong's voice, Zheshio finally responded, but he still said nothing. On the contrary, he closed his eyes. After returning from Hanqiu City to the capital, the Li Palace had sent a cardinal to personally treat him. Currently, the poison in his body was completely suppressed in his eyes. Although he still could not see, it should not worsen, and his life was not in danger. He did not care about these problems. He was more concerned about what had happened in the Garden of Zhou. Why had the sky of the Garden of Zhou collapsed? Had Nank and those demon experts died? Had Qin Chongqing also died? And also, had Qi Jian's injuries gotten any better? Was he unconscious, or had he already woken up? He concentrated on these matters, hoping that he could use this method to alleviate his pain. However, his face grew paler and paler, beads of sweat the size of soybeans rolling down his forehead. An extremely thin needle was stuck between his eyebrows. Zhou Tong pinched the end of the needle between his fingers and lightly twisted it. Zhou Tong's expression was very calm. It did not seem like he was executing a torture, but more like a doctor saving his patient. Zheshio's breathing grew more and more hurried, his eyebrows creased more and more, and his body began to violently tremble. The thin chains that passed through his body rubbed against his flesh, scraping away the rotten flesh and new tender flesh. Zhou Tong lightly brushed the end of the needle. Zheshio's mouth was already full of blood from his bite, but he could no longer endure. He cried out in pain, his hoarse voice echoing through the quiet and gloomy Zhou prison. He wanted to faint, but he was in so much pain that he could not faint. Life and death, pain and relief, Everything was in Zhou Tong's fingers. Mo Yu left the garden of Zhou and headed for the imperial palace. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the gray stones, causing them to undulate. She felt that it would have been better if the carriage had been pulled by a black goat. However, the black goat did not like Zhou Tong and would never follow her there. Suddenly, the carriage stopped. She calmly gazed at the curtain in front of the carriage and asked, "Your Highness, what do you want to do?" Luolua's voice was clear and bright, like a newly sprouted leaf in early spring. "I want to tell all of you that just because teacher has not returned does not mean that the Orthodox Academy has no one." Chapter 405. Mo Yu parted the curtain in front of her and walked out. Looking at that elegant, cute, and noble little girl, she smiled and said, "Your Highness, I don't really understand what you mean." Luoluo did not smile. Her eyes were still very bright as she said, "You know what I mean. I want Zhixio to return to the Orthodox Academy." Mo Yu slightly raised her brows and pretended to be perplexed as she asked, "Wofu Zhixio, what relationship does he have with the Orthodox Academy?" Luoluo very seriously replied, "Zhixio is a student of the Orthodox Academy." Mo Yu calmly replied, "There is no record in the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, so no one will admit it." This was a very direct refusal. If the Orthodox Academy had no way of proving that Zhixio was a student, then no matter how noble Luolua's status was, there was no reason for her to exert pressure on the great Zhou imperial court. Luoluo stared into her eyes and said, "You clearly understand that my teacher and I will definitely protect him." Mo Yu replied, "The imperial court places great importance on the law. Whether Zhixio is guilty or not will still have to be tried." Luoluo asked, "Then have you ever thought if teacher comes back, how will you explain it to him?" Hearing this, Mo Yu recalled Zhou Tong's words from before. For some reason, she felt angry and said, "Why should I explain it to Qin Changsheng? Do you think I'm afraid of him?" Luoluo asked, "Then why don't you hurry and bring my teacher back?" Mo Yu sneered, "The reason Qin Changsheng hasn't come back is because he wants to follow Su Li. At present, the entire world wants to kill Su Li, but this idiot insists on protecting Su Li. What does this have to do with me? What does it have to do with the Empress? If your Highness has the ability, there is no harm in letting him clearly understand his own stupidity." These words were spoken very quickly, like pearls falling onto a jade plate. The clear sound never stopped because she truly was very angry. Angry at his stubbornness, angry at his idiocy, angry at his not cherishing his own life. The him here was naturally Qin Changsheng. Luolua's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Looking at her, she said, "If teacher doesn't come back, he naturally has his reasons. If you're really worried about him, if you have the ability, bring him back." Mo Yu became even angrier. She thought to herself, "Why would I be worried about Qin Changsheng's life or death?" She said, "Your Highness, you should be well aware of just who is standing behind the people who killed Su Li in Xunyang City. If you have the ability, then have His Holiness retract the decree." Luoluo no longer paid her any attention and turned to walk out of the imperial palace. Only her clear and childish voice still echoed. "In any case, if you have the ability, have His Holiness take back my teacher's bed." Hearing these words, Mo Yu's cheeks blushed slightly. She stared at her back, suppressing her shyness as she said, "Your Highness is so young, yet you care about these things. I don't have that kind of ability." It could be said that she had no ability, but when Mo Yu walked onto the dew platform and saw the divine Empress bathed in the radiance of the night pearls at the edge of the platform, she still couldn't help but want to say something. Finally, when she opened her mouth, she talked about her previous encounter. "Chen of Yu, Mo of Li, Mo Yu, and said of you, when Mo Yu of Chan of family, Chen, Yu and Emperor," Ming Mo Yu softly replied. "Presumably, Qin Changsheng still has some use." The divine Empress smiled. In the past few days, the capital has been spreading the news that Chen Chongqing was not able to leave the Garden of Zhou and may have already lost his life. I hear that she's very sad. Mo thought sad is not as simple as that. Just when she was about to say something, the Divine Empress suddenly turned around and glanced at her. It was just a very simple glance, very light, without any deep meaning, just a casual glance. It didn't ask about the relationship between her and Chen Chongsheng like Zhou Tong and Luo Luo did. But her body suddenly became much colder. After hearing the news that Chen Chongqing had died in the Garden of Zhou, her mood was also somewhat off. Of course, she did not cry. She only felt somewhat disappointed, very perplexed, as if something was missing from her life. She knew that this sort of emotional reaction was very problematic. She was very worried that others would see this problem. But tonight, first Zhou Tong had asked, then Luo Luo had brought it up, and now the Empress had glanced at her. How could she not be nervous? Fortunately, the Divine Empress did not do anything. She only extended her hand and lightly stroked her smooth and exquisite cheek, like she was playing with a cat or like she was playing with some very wonderful object. Everyone knew that Mo Yu was an extremely beautiful woman, so beautiful that she was like a work of art. The Divine Empress rarely acted so intimately with anyone, not even her own daughter, let alone those sons who had died and descendants who had been exiled to the various counties. In these past few years, only Mo was an exception. There were times when some busybodies would even make many scandalous speculations about the relationship between these two lofty women of the great Zhou dynasty. But these speculations did not spread too far. This was because the Divine Empress's status was too lofty, and also because the Divine Empress was also a beauty. She was even more beautiful than Mo. From the era of Taizong, she had been publicly acknowledged as the #1 beauty. Chen Chongqing will not die. The Divine Empress gazed at the myriad stars in the night sky, her expression very casual. Mo heard these words, but it was like she had heard the voice of an immortal. She immediately felt much more relaxed. She walked to the Divine Empress's side, and just like in the past when the mood was at its best, she lightly held the Divine Empress's arm. Then what about Su Li? Will he die? Today at noon, the news that Su Li and Qin Chongqing had appeared in Xuanyang City had finally reached the capital, and Zhu Luo's action had only been confirmed at dusk. Su Li was an enemy feared by the demons, and at the same time he had always been an opponent of the great Zhou. Mo would not care about his life or death like she did for Qin Chongqing. She would only be a little worried, because Su Li was no ordinary person. His life or death was highly likely to change the entire situation of the continent. And just what did the Divine Empress think about this? What I think is not important, because no one has ever asked me what I think about this matter. The Divine Empress stood on the edge of the dew platform, her hands held behind her. Her figure was clearly graceful, but it gave off a majestic feeling like she was embracing the world. Her words at this moment were tinged with ridicule and coldness. Mo understood the Empress's meaning. Divine General Shui, he had not received the Empress's decree before making his move, but the entire continent would regard his action as the Divine Empress's will. In the great Zhou dynasty, whether it was the old or the new powers, the imperial court or the orthodoxy, there were far too many people who wanted Su Li dead. This was because the millions upon millions of Zhou people had a common dream: to unite the north and south and unite the world. But if he dies, then he dies. The Divine Empress gazed at that star in the night sky that had already shone brightly for several centuries, but had now become abnormally dim. After a moment of silence, she said, "In any case, I don't like Su Li. He's too distant from the world. What use is there in keeping him?" The next chapter will be updated before 12. Chapter 406. In Xuanyang City, there were only two factions that had the qualifications or the confidence to directly oppose Zhu Luo: Shui He and the great Zhou Northern Army, and Hua Jiefu and the branch of the orthodoxy. From Zhu Luo's actions, the Li Palace's stance was extremely clear. Now that the divine empress had agreed to Su Li's death, Su Li truly did deserve to die, but Zhixiu was still imprisoned in Zhou prison. Mou found it somewhat impossible to ascertain just what the empress thought of Chen Chongqing. In the end, she could not hold back and voiced the doubt in her heart. If Chen Chongqing insists on protecting Su Li, then what should we do? The divine empress calmly replied, "Don't forget what kind of person Zhu Luo is." Of the 4 families of Tianliang, the Liang household had endured silently for 1,000 years. In that great chaos 10 some years ago, Su Li's sword had stolen away all of its boldness. Although Liang Wang's son was very outstanding, it was no longer possible for him to recreate the Liang household's former magnificence. The Wang clan was half in ruins, and its old garden had long since been reduced to ruins. Even a person like Wang Pao had been forced to flee to the south. Only Zhu Luo had a good relationship with the old imperial clan, and his relationship with Mei Lisha was even more intimate. For him to attack Su Li in Xuanyang City, it was obvious that it was the Li Palace's will, so he naturally would not let Chen Chongqing die. As for whether or not there would be an accident, the storms of the 8 directions were transcendental experts. After Su Li was heavily injured, Zhu Luo was the sole, supreme existence in Xuanyang City. He had complete control over the situation. So how could he let an accident happen? Mou understood everything and finally relaxed. Looking at the Empress's dazzling and beautiful face, she thought to herself, "Then what about you? Do you want Chen Chongqing to live, or do you want him to die?" Some people died to kill, like Liang Xiaoxiao. Some people went to die to save, like Chen Chongqing and Wang Pa. There were also some people that were striving to revive themselves so that they could live. That person was Qiu Shanjun. When the clue to the Garden of Zhou appeared on the continent, as the world's publicly acknowledged #1 ethereal opening cultivator, Qiu Shanjun accepted the arrangements of the 5 saints and entered some place. Under the confrontation of several demon experts of the same level, he seized the key to the Garden of Zhou. For the sake of this matter, he had disappeared for many days, missing the grand examination and viewing the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books. He also did not know that the Mount Li Sword sect and the Qiushan clan had decided to go to the capital to propose for him. Moreover, he had been heavily injured, and it had been difficult for him to recover. But all of this was worth it, because the Garden of Zhou had fallen into the hands of humans, because when he was in desperate straits, he erupted with unprecedented energy, and because the blood of the true dragon had awakened once more, allowing him to successfully break into star condensation in one go. Just like before, he had once again shocked the entire world. Who could compare to Qiu Shanjun? Chen Chongqing had obtained first place upon the first banner in the grand examination and had attracted a Knight of Starlight in the Mausoleum of Books. Together with Su Yurong, he had become the youngest upper-level ethereal opening cultivator in history. But he still could not catch up to him. Some clergy of Li Palace and people like Tang 36 had a different view on this. From their point of view, Chen Chongqing was still young and had only cultivated for a little more than a year. To have such progress, it was only a matter of time before he caught up to Qiu Shanjun. They even thought that comparing Qiu Shanjun to Chen Chongqing was like bullying the weak. But in reality, Qiu Shanjun was actually not even 20 years old. He was even younger than Go Hanqi by a year. It was just that his blood of the true dragon and his talent in cultivation were far too shocking. His style of conduct was far too perfect. He had become famous too early. So many people, whether they were Chen Chongqing supporters or his admirers, had all forgotten about this matter. To possess a star domain before the age of 20. Just what sort of concept was this? This was a legend. As long as he could calmly and courageously live and cultivate like he had in the past 20 years, it was extremely likely that he would become the second Su Li. No, in the view of countless people, he was even more steady and trustworthy than Su Li. The human world needed someone like him even more. But first, Qiu Shanjun had to come back to life. Black robe had shaken the rainbow that had traversed tens of thousands of li, causing the injuries in his body to become even more severe. Afterwards, in order to stabilize the rainbow, in order to quickly reopen the garden of Zhou and bring out the human cultivators within, Qiu Shanjun disregarded his heavy injuries and endlessly poured true essence and the qi of his blood into the rainbow day and night. When the gate to the garden of Zhou finally reopened, his mind slightly relaxed. He could no longer endure, so he closed his eyes on the prayer mat and fell into a deep sleep. He was not truly unconscious, but in the entirety of Mount Li, only he knew the secret technique of the path of the sword, sword rest. When martial granduncle Su Li had passed on sword styles to him for a month, the first thing he had taught him was sword rest. On the surface, sword rest seemed like a coma, but the difference was that the person who entered the state of sword rest could still hear the sounds of the outside world. It was just that because all the true essence and essence blood had to be used to suppress and repair the injuries and cleanse the Tao heart, there was no more. Not even a single drop of essence blood could be used to maintain movement. Even moving a finger would directly cause the injuries to completely explode. In other words, the current Qiu Shanjun was like a blind youth paralyzed in bed. The reason why Qiu Shanjun had so resolutely poured all his essence blood into the rainbow was because he was worried about his fellow cultivators in the garden of Zhou, worried about his junior sister Su Yurong. It was also because he was very clear that although this would cause his injuries to become extremely severe, as long as he could maintain the state of sword rest for 49 days, he should be able to heal the injuries in his body. Right now, many days had already passed. There were still several days until he woke up from the state of sword rest. He wanted to wake up ahead of time. Even if he was heavily injured, he still wanted to wake up. Because starting from many days ago, many voices had been constantly transmitted into his ears. There were cries of alarm, voices of concern, voices of discussion, and then there were cries of alarm. Third junior brother was dead? Liang Xiaoxiao was dead? Qiu Shanjun's Tao heart felt like it had suffered a heavy blow. His grief was at its peak, and at the same time his rage was at its peak. Who was it who dared to kill a fellow disciple of my Mount Li? Dared to kill a person of my 7 laws? Dared to kill my junior brother? But he could do nothing. He could only listen to the sect master's trembling voice, as well as the whispers that gradually faded into the distance. In the dark world of sword rest, Qiu Shanjun gradually regained his calm. He vaguely sensed that there was something wrong with the situation. After a few days, junior brother Qi Jian was carried back and carried into the sect master's dwelling, placed on the bed across from him. At the moment, on the highest peak of Mount Li, 2 unconscious disciples were lying on the ground. Who had done this? Just what had happened in the garden of Zhou. Qiu Shanjun calmly, even callously, pondered. He was like a sword resting in its sheath, ready to reveal its edge at any time. With his eyes closed, he heard many names. Zhixiu Zhuang Huanyu, Chun Changshen. Was it like this? So it was like this.